A sun-soaked Caribbean resort hides a deadly secret beneath the palms of Coconut Cove. Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, stumbles into a web of greed and revenge. A stolen sapphire necklace, cursed to ruin all who touch it, binds three strangers: charming hotelier Marcel Duval, icy heiress Celeste Warrington, and brooding expat Roger Blake, in a vendetta rooted in betrayal. As whispers of a lost treasure echo through the island's cliffs, a cryptic note, a slashed purse, and a near-fatal plunge spark questions. Who's hunting the Sapphire Star? What grudges drive their plot? And can Miss Marple unravel their scheme before paradise turns deadly? From moonlit caves to a tense cliffside showdown, she stitches clues together, exposing a conspiracy that threatens to shatter the island's peace. Will justice prevail, or will the curse claim its next victim? Chapter 1. The scent of trouble in paradise. Heavy trade winds carried a whisper of salt and hibiscus as Miss Jane Marple stepped off the small propeller plane onto the tarmac of Honoré International Airport. St. Lucia unfurled before her like a vibrant tapestry, emerald hills tumbling into sapphire seas, the twin pitons piercing the horizon like ancient sentinels. At 74, with her silver hair neatly pinned and her sensible straw hat shading her sharp eyes, Miss Marple was no stranger to beauty. But this island's radiance stirred even her pragmatic heart. She adjusted her cream linen shawl, a gift from her nephew Raymond, and inhaled deeply. The air was warm, alive, and faintly spiced with intrigue. She had come at the invitation of Lady Evelyn Harcourt, an old-school friend who had married into minor aristocracy and now wintered at her husband's Coconut Cove resort. Evelyn's letter, penned in her looping script, had been insistent. Jane, you must escape that dreary St. Mary Mead fog. Come bask in our sunshine. The resort is divine, the guests fascinating, and I shan't take no for an answer. Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undertones of urgency, sensed more than a holiday beckoned. Evelyn's words hinted at unease, a ripple beneath the surface of her gilded life. So, with a suitcase packed with cotton dresses and her trusty knitting needles, Miss Marple had boarded the flight, curious and alert. A sleek black car awaited her, its driver a young man with a dazzling smile and a name tag reading Amos. He tipped his cap, his accent a melodic lilt. Welcome to St. Lucia, Miss Marple. Lady Evelyn's been talking 'bout you non-stop. Says you're sharper than a coral reef. Miss Marple chuckled, settling into the leather seat. Dear Evelyn always did exaggerate. Tell me, Amos, is the resort as charming as she claims? Oh, Coconut Cove's a gem, ma'am. White sand, clear water, and cocktails that taste like heaven. But he paused, glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his smile tightening. It's got its own kind of pulse. You know, folks come to relax, but some bring their secrets with them. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, a silent invitation to continue, but Amos merely turned up the radio, letting calypso rhythms fill the silence. Miss Marple gazed out the window as the car wound through lush valleys, past roadside stalls brimming with mangoes and starfruit. Secrets, she mused. They were like the tiny crabs scuttling across the beach, hidden until the tide receded. The Coconut Cove resort emerged like a mirage, its whitewashed villas cascading down a hillside to meet a crescent of powdery sand. Bougainvillea spilled over trellises, and palm trees swayed in choreographed grace. Amos carried her suitcase to the open-air lobby, where ceiling fans stirred the humid air and a fountain bubbled like champagne. Lady Evelyn swept forward, her caftan billowing, her auburn hair barely touched by gray despite her 60-odd years. Jane, darling. Evelyn clasped her hands, her emerald rings catching the light. "You're here at last. Isn't it glorious? Come, let's get you settled." Then a rum punch on the terrace. No arguments. Miss Marple smiled, noting the faint strain in Evelyn's voice. The way her eyes darted toward the bustling lobby. "It's quite lovely, Evelyn. You've outdone yourself. But you must tell me everything, how you managed this paradise." "Oh, it's Henry's doing, really," Evelyn said, waving a hand toward her husband, Lord Henry Harcourt, who was deep in conversation with a porter. "He's the visionary. I just keep the guests happy. Now, your room overlooks the Bay Perfect. For your knitting and people watching, I dare say, the room was indeed perfect. Airy suite with a four-poster bed, gauzy curtains, and a balcony where the sea sparkled like a spilled jewel box." Miss Marple unpacked methodically, placing her knitting bag on a wicker chair and her spectacles beside a guidebook on St. Lucian folklore. She changed into a light blue dress, pinned her hat, and joined Evelyn at the Sunset Terrace, a cliffside perch where waiters glided with trays of frosted glasses. The terrace hummed with life. Guests lounged in linen and sunglasses, their laughter mingling with the clink of ice and the distant crash of waves. Evelyn pointed out a few notables: a retired diplomat nursing a mojito, a French actress draped in silk, a tech mogul tapping furiously at his phone. But Miss Marple's attention snagged on three figures at the bar, their postures rigid despite the relaxed setting. The first was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a cream suit, his dark hair slicked back. He leaned against the bar, exuding charm as he chatted with a waitress, but his eyes flicked restlessly over the crowd. "That's Mr. Marcel Duval," Evelyn murmured. "Our hotelier. Runs the place like a Swiss watch. Henry swears by him, though he's a bit intense." The second was a woman, perhaps 40, with platinum hair coiled in a chignon and a sapphire blue sundress that matched her cool gaze. She sipped a martini, her fingers adorned with a single, oversized ring. "Celeste Warrington," Evelyn said, "heiress to some shipping fortune, keeps to herself. But she's been asking odd questions about the resort's history." The third was a man in his late 30s, ruggedly handsome with a weathered face and a linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He stood apart, nursing a beer, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Roger Blake," Evelyn added, "an expat, been on the island for years. Writes travel blogs, or so he says. Bit of a loner." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers itching for her knitting needles, a habit that steadied her thoughts. The trio's isolation from the crowd, their guarded glances, suggested a connection, a triangle of tension. She sipped her rum punch, its sweetness cut by a tart lime edge, and let the scene imprint on her memory as the sun dipped, painting the sky in mango and rose. Miss Marple and Evelyn moved to a wicker sofa, joined by Lord Henry, a jovial man with a sunburned nose and a penchant for storytelling. He regaled them with tales of the island's pirate past, his voice booming over the terrace. "St. Lucia's got secrets in her bones," he said, swirling his drink. "Coves where smugglers hid gold, caves stuffed with loot. Ever hear of the Sapphire Star?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "I don't believe I have." "Oh, it's a legend." Henry leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "A sapphire necklace, big as a gull's egg, stolen from a French governor's wife in the 1800s. They say its cursed, brings ruin to anyone who claims it. Vanished 50 years ago, but folks still hunt for it. Divers, treasure seekers, you name it." Evelyn laughed, "But it was brittle." "Henry, you'll scare Jane off. It's just a story." "Stories have roots," Miss Marple said softly, her eyes drifting to the bar. Mr. Duval was now speaking to Celeste, his hand brushing hers briefly before she pulled away. Roger watched them, his jaw tight. A story indeed, she thought, and one with thorns. Dinner was served under a canopy of fairy lights, the tables laden with grilled mahi-mahi, plantain fritters, and mango salsa. Miss Marple sat between Evelyn and a chatty botanist who waxed poetic about the island's orchids. But her attention strayed to the bar, where the trio had reconvened. Their voices were low, their gestures sharp. She strained to catch fragments, her hearing still keen despite her years. "Not here, not now," Celeste hissed, her voice like ice. "You're running out of time," Roger muttered, his accent faintly Australian. Mr. Duval's tone was smooth, placating. "Patience. It's closer than you think." The word vendetta slipped from Celeste's lips, sharp and deliberate, before she turned away, her heels clicking on the stone floor. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Vendetta. A word heavy with intent, not tossed lightly in paradise. She memorized their faces. Duval's polished charm, Celeste's icy elegance, Roger's brooding intensity. They were players in a game she didn't yet understand, but she would. As dessert, a coconut flan as delicate as sea foam was served. Miss Marple engaged Evelyn in small talk, probing gently. "Your guests are quite a mix, Evelyn. Have you noticed any tensions among them?" Evelyn's smile faltered. "Oh, you know resorts, Jane. Everyone's got their little dramas. But nothing serious, I'm sure." Her fingers twisted her napkin, betraying her words. Miss Marple nodded, letting it pass. Evelyn was holding something back, but pushing now would yield nothing. Instead, she turned her gaze to the stars emerging above the bay, their light sharp against the velvet sky. The terrace was emptying, guests drifting to their villas or the beach for a moonlight stroll. The trio had vanished, their absence as telling as their presence. She excused herself, claiming fatigue, and returned to her suite. The balcony beckoned, and she settled into a wicker chair, her knitting bag at her side. The sea whispered below, a rhythmic lullaby, but her mind was far from rest. She drew out a skein of pale blue wool and began to knit, the click of needles grounding her thoughts. The trio's behavior suggested a shared purpose, a conspiracy woven through their glances and half-heard words. Vendetta implied a wrong to be righted, a debt to be paid. Was it tied to the sapphire star, that cursed relic Henry had described? Or was it personal, a grudge rooted in their pasts? Mr. Duval, with his proprietary air, seemed tethered to the resort's history. Celeste's wealth and questions about the past hinted at a family connection. Roger, the outsider, carried the weight of a man haunted by more than sunburn. Miss Marple's needles paused as a shadow moved on the beach below. A figure. Roger, she thought. From his loping gait slipped toward the palm grove, a flashlight's beam flickering briefly. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. He was searching for something, his movements furtive. A moment later, another figure, Celeste, unmistakable in her blue dress, followed. Keeping to the shadows, Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her heart quickening with the thrill of discovery. She considered alerting Evelyn but dismissed the idea. This was her puzzle now, and she would unravel it stitch by stitch. The night was warm, the air thick with jasmine and possibility. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her mind mapping the trio's connections, their motives, their secrets. The sapphire star, the vendetta, the resort's gilded facade, it all pointed to a truth buried like treasure in the sand. As the moon rose, casting silver across the bay, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The first threads of the mystery were in her hands, and she would follow them, as she always did, to the heart of the truth. Tomorrow, she would begin in earnest conversations with Amos, a closer look at Duval's operations, perhaps a chat with Celeste over tea. For now, she let the island's rhythm lull her, content in the knowledge that trouble, like the tide, always revealed its secrets in time. Chapter 2. The shadow of the past sun dipped low over Coconut Cove Resort, casting a golden sheen across the turquoise waters of St. Lucia. Miss Jane Marple, seated on her private balcony, sipped a cup of chamomile tea, her sharp eyes scanning the bustling scene below. The resort was alive with laughter and clinking glasses, guests mingling in the open-air dining hall for the evening's welcome dinner. Her friend, Lady Evelyn Harcourt, had insisted she attend, promising an evening of island charm and intriguing company. But Miss Marple's mind lingered on the cryptic conversation she'd overheard at the beach bar the previous evening, a mention of a vendetta and a sapphire necklace that stirred her curiosity like a breeze rustling dry leaves. Dressed in a simple lavender frock, her silver hair neatly pinned, Miss Marple descended the spiral staircase to the dining hall. The room was a vision of tropical elegance, tables draped in white linen, adorned with hibiscus centerpieces, and lit by flickering lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of jerk chicken and mango salsa mingled with the salty air drifting through open shutters. Guests, a mix of wealthy travelers and local dignitaries, chatted animatedly, their voices rising over the soft strumming of a steel drum band. Lady Evelyn, resplendent in a flowing emerald gown, waved Miss Marple over to a table near the center of the room. "Jane, darling, you're just in time," she called, her voice warm but tinged with the aristocratic drawl of her youth. "I've saved you a seat with the most fascinating people." Miss Marple settled into her chair, her modest appearance belying the keen mind that catalogued every detail. To her left sat Mr. Antoine Duval, the resort's charismatic hotelier, his tailored suit and easy smile masking a certain wariness in his dark eyes. Across from her was Celeste Warrington, a striking heiress with auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, her sapphire earrings catching the lantern light. Beside Celeste was Roger Blake, a rugged expat with a weathered face and a restless energy, his fingers drumming on the table as if impatient for something or someone. "Thank you, Evelyn," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but clear. "This is quite a gathering." "Oh, you've no idea," Lady Evelyn replied, leaning closer. "St. Lucia's history is as rich as its rum, and tonight I'm sharing a few of its tales." She gestured to the other guests, who included a retired diplomat, a marine biologist, and a local poet, all listening with polite interest. "But first, let's eat," as waiters served plates of grilled snapper and coconut rice. Lady Evelyn launched into her storytelling. Her voice carried the cadence of a seasoned raconteur, weaving tales of St. Lucia's pirate-haunted past and volcanic heart. Miss Marple listened, her fork poised, but her attention sharpened when Evelyn mentioned the Sapphire Star. "Now, this island has its share of legends," Evelyn said, her eyes twinkling, "but none so captivating as the Sapphire Star, a necklace said to be cursed, crafted in the 18th century for a governor's wife. Its central gem, a flawless sapphire the size of a quail's egg, was rumored to bring misfortune to its wearer. It vanished during a raid in 1792, stolen by smugglers, and hasn't been seen since. Some say it's buried here, on this very island, waiting to curse anyone who dares claim it." The table murmured with interest, but Miss Marple noted the reactions of her three suspects. Mr. Duval's smile tightened. his hand pausing mid-sip of his rum punch. Celeste's fingers brushed her sapphire earrings, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, then closing again. Roger's drumming fingers stilled, his gaze flicking toward the darkened windows. Their unease was subtle, but to Miss Marple, it was as loud as a shout. Fascinating, Miss Marple said mildly, her eyes crinkling with a smile. A cursed necklace, lost to time. Do you think it's still out there, Evelyn? Oh, I'm sure it is, Evelyn replied, oblivious to the undercurrents. Legends like that don't just fade away. They linger, like shadows in the sand. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: sailing excursions, the best snorkeling spots, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The Sapphire Star, she mused, was no mere legend to these three. Their guarded glances suggested a shared secret, one tied to the vendetta she'd overheard. But what was it? Revenge, greed, or something deeper, rooted in the island's past? As dessert, a tangy passion fruit sorbet was served. The dining hall's lights flickered. A low hum filled the air, then a sharp pop, and the room plunged into darkness. Gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the guests. Miss Marple sat still, her senses heightened, catching the faint rustle of fabric and a muffled curse from Roger's direction. The darkness lasted only a moment before the lights snapped back on, revealing flushed faces and spilled drinks. Oh, dear, these island outages, Evelyn said, fanning herself. Nothing to worry about. But Miss Marple's eyes were on Celeste, who clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. Is everything all right, Miss Warrington? She asked gently. Celeste started, her smile forced. Oh, yes, just startled. My purse, it's fine. But it wasn't fine. As Celeste set the purse on the table, Miss Marple noticed a jagged tear along its side, the silk lining exposed. Something white peeked out, and Celeste quickly tucked it away. But not before Miss Marple glimpsed a folded piece of paper. Perhaps you caught it on something, Miss Marple suggested, her tone innocent. Perhaps, Celeste said curtly, her eyes darting to Mr. Duval, who was now engrossed in conversation with the diplomat, though his posture was stiff. The dinner resumed, but Miss Marple's curiosity burned brighter. As the guests dispersed for after-dinner drinks on the veranda, she lingered, pretending to adjust her shawl. When Celeste excused herself to the powder room, her purse left briefly unattended, Miss Marple seized her chance. With a deft movement, she slipped the folded paper from the torn lining and tucked it into her sleeve, her heart steady despite the risk. Back in her room, she unfolded the note under the soft glow of her bedside lamp. The words, scrawled in black ink, were chilling. The past never stays buried. No signature, no address, just those 5 words, jagged and urgent. Miss Marple sat back, her mind racing. The note was no prank, it was a warning, tied to the Sapphire Star and the vendetta. But who had written it, and who was it meant for? She thought of Mr. Duval's tense smile, Celeste's nervous fingers, Roger's restless energy. Each had reacted to the outage and the note's discovery in their own way. But their unease was shared. Miss Marple opened her notebook, a habit from her St. Mary Mead days, and jotted down their names, circling them with a question mark. Beneath, she wrote, Sapphire Star, smuggling, betrayal, revenge. The next morning, Miss Marple joined Lady Evelyn for breakfast on the terrace, the air fragrant with frangipani. Evelyn was in high spirits, regaling her with plans for a boat tour to the volcanic caves. You must come, Jane. The caves are spectacular, and the stories, oh, the smugglers' tales. Miss Marple smiled, her mind still on the note. I'd love to hear more about those smugglers. Evelyn, were they ever caught? Some were, Evelyn said, buttering a scone. The Sapphire Star's theft was the scandal of its day. A smuggler, named Captain Warrington Celeste's great-uncle, if you can believe it, was suspected. But he vanished before the authorities could nab him. The necklace was never found, and the resort's original owners, the Duval family, lost everything in the fallout. Miss Marple's teacup paused mid-air. The Duval family? As in Mr. Duval? Oh, yes, Evelyn said, lowering her voice. Antoine's father rebuilt the family's fortune, but the scandal left its mark. Antoine's worked hard to restore the resort's reputation, but you know how gossip lingers. Miss Marple nodded, her mind slotting pieces into place. Celeste's family, tied to the necklace's theft. Mr. Duval's family, ruined by it. And Roger, where did he fit? An outsider, perhaps, but his unease suggested a personal stake. The vendetta, she suspected, was no abstract grudge but a tangled web of family secrets and old wounds. Determined to dig deeper, Miss Marple spent the morning in the resort's library, a cozy room lined with mahogany shelves and faded maps. She charmed the librarian, a weary man named Mr. Phipps, into showing her the archives. Just a bit of history for a curious old lady, she said, her eyes twinkling. Mr. Phipps, flattered, pulled out yellowed newspapers from the 1790s. The headlines screamed of the Sapphire Star's theft, with sketches of the necklace, a cascade of diamonds, framing a heart-shaped sapphire. One article mentioned Captain Warrington, described as a rogue with a silver tongue, last seen fleeing to Martinique. Another detailed the Duval family's downfall, their estate sold to cover debts after the scandal. Miss Marple's fingers lingered on a grainy photograph of the resort's founder, Antoine's great-grandfather, his stern face eerily similar to his descendants. As she read, a shadow fell across the page. Mr. Duval stood in the doorway, his smile polite but strained. Miss Marple, I didn't expect to find you here. Interested in our island's history? Oh, very much, she replied, closing the newspaper with a gentle pat. It's quite a story, isn't it? The Sapphire Star, the smugglers, so dramatic. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. A sad chapter for my family. But we've moved on. If you'll excuse me, I have guests to attend to. As he left, Miss Marple noted the stiffness in his gait, as if he carried a weight he couldn't shake. She returned to her room, her notebook now filled with names, dates, and connections. The Sapphire Star wasn't just a jewel, it was a symbol of betrayal, loss, and perhaps revenge. The note in Celeste's purse suggested someone knew more than they should, and Miss Marple was determined to find out who. That afternoon, she strolled through the resort's gardens, her parasol shielding her from the sun. The paths wound past bougainvillea and banana trees, leading to a secluded gazebo where she spotted Mr. Duval and Celeste in hushed conversation. She paused behind a palm, her ears straining. It's too risky, Celeste whispered, her voice sharp. If anyone finds out, they won't. Mr. Duval cut in, his tone low but firm. Not if we're careful. You know what's at stake. Miss Marple's heart quickened. She couldn't see the package Mr. Duval slipped into Celeste's hand, but its weight made Celeste's fingers tremble. They parted quickly, unaware of their observer. Miss Marple made a mental note. Package, alliance, or coercion. That evening, the resort hosted a calypso night, the air alive with steel drums and swaying dancers. Miss Marple, seated at a corner table, watched Celeste and Roger across the room. They stood apart, but their eyes met in a fleeting, charged glance. When Celeste stepped away to take a call, Roger followed, and Miss Marple, ever discreet, trailed them to the edge of the dance floor in the shadow of a coconut tree. Their voices were low but heated. "You owe me, Roger," Celeste hissed. "After what happened, you can't back out now." "Don't lecture me about debts," Roger snapped, his voice rough. "I've paid enough." Miss Marple retreated before they noticed her, her mind buzzing. Debts, packages, a cursed necklace. The pieces were forming a picture, but it was still blurred. Back in her room, she spread her notes across the desk, sketching a timeline of the Sapphire Star's history. Captain Warrington's theft in 1792, the Duval family's ruin, the note in Celeste's purse, the trio's uneasy alliance. It all pointed to a vendetta rooted in a forgotten crime. But the motive, revenge, greed, or redemption, remained elusive. As she closed her notebook, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill, the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle taking shape. She would attend the boat tour tomorrow, keeping her eyes on Mr. Duval, Celeste, and Roger. The Sapphire Star's shadow stretched long, and she was determined to step into its light. Chapter 3. Whispers on the wind. The morning sun spilled across Coconut Cove Resort, painting the hibiscus-lined paths in hues of gold and crimson. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted to shield her eyes, strolled through the lush gardens, her sensible shoes crunching softly on the gravel. The air was thick with the scent of frangipani and salt, a heady mix that seemed to carry secrets on every breeze. She had woken early, her mind buzzing from the previous night's dinner, where Lady Evelyn's tales of the Sapphire Star had stirred her curiosity. The cryptic note found in the slashed purse, "The past never stays buried," had only deepened her resolve to unravel the threads of this island mystery. As she wandered, Miss Marple's keen eyes darted to the vibrant chaos of the gardens. Hummingbirds flitting between blossoms, a gardener clipping hedges with rhythmic precision, and, in the distance, the glint of turquoise waves beyond the palms. The resort felt alive, yet beneath its polished surface, she sensed a pulse of unease. The trio she'd identified: Mr. Duval, the charming hotelier, Celeste Warrington, the secretive heiress, and Roger Blake, the brooding expat, had been too guarded, their glances too sharp, to be mere vacationers. Their reactions to the note last night, subtle but unmistakable, had confirmed her suspicions. They were bound by something more than chance. She paused near a cluster of bougainvillea, pretending to admire the vivid magenta petals while listening to the low hum of voices nearby. A young groundskeeper, his shirt stained with earth, was chatting with a maid by a fountain. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her ears attuned to their conversation. "Amos, you hear 'bout that old necklace?" the maid said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "They say it's cursed, bringin' trouble wherever it goes." Amos, a weary man with a gap-toothed grin, shook his head. "Leela, that's just talk. But my granddad used to say the Sapphire Star was no myth. Smugglers hid it round here, back when the island was wild. Folks still lookin', thinkin' it's buried somewhere." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Local gossip was often a treasure trove of truth, and Amos's words hinted at a history she could mine. She approached, her demeanor warm but unassuming, her knitting bag slung over one shoulder. "Good morning," she said brightly, her voice carrying the gentle cadence of an English spinster. "What a lovely garden. You must be proud of your work here." Amos straightened, tipping his cap. "Mornin', ma'am. These gardens are my pride. Been tendin' 'em for years. I'm Jane Marple, she said, her eyes twinkling. And you are? Amos. Ma'am, groundskeeper. He glanced at Leela, who excused herself with a shy nod and scurried off. Miss Marple tilted her head, as if struck by a sudden thought. I couldn't help but overhear you mention a necklace. The sapphire star, was it? It sounds terribly intriguing. Amos hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice dropping. It's old island talk, Miss Marple. The sapphire star was a beauty big blue gem, set in silver, stolen from a merchant ship in the 40s. They say it belonged to a pirate's lover, cursed to bring ruin to anyone who claimed it. Smugglers used this island as a hideout back then. Some folks think it's still here, buried or locked away. How fascinating, Miss Marple murmured, her mind already sorting through the implications. A cursed necklace, a smuggling ring, and a trio of guests with secrets. There was a pattern forming, faint but promising. And do people still search for it? Amos chuckled. Oh, aye. Treasure hunters come and go. But the resort's been here since the 50s. Built over old smuggler haunts. If that necklace is anywhere, it's close. Maybe too close for some. His words hung in the air, and Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, filing away the detail. She thanked Amos and continued her walk, her pace slow but deliberate, her eyes scanning for anything or anyone out of place. Near a secluded gazebo draped in jasmine, she spotted movement. Mr. Duval, his tailored linen suit pristine despite the humidity, was speaking in hushed tones to Celeste Warrington. The heiress, her auburn hair pulled into a tight chignon, clutched a silk shawl as if it were a shield. Miss Marple slipped behind a palm, her small frame nearly invisible, and watched as Duval handed Celeste a small, cloth-wrapped package. Celeste's fingers trembled as she tucked it into her purse, her eyes darting nervously. Keep it safe, Duval said, his voice low but sharp. No mistakes this time. Celeste nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I know what's at stake. Victor, don't lecture me. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The exchange was brief but loaded, the package a tangible clue. As Duval walked away, his stride too casual to be natural, Celeste lingered, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Miss Marple made a mental note. The package was significant, and Celeste's unease suggested she was not entirely in control. The day unfolded with the rhythm of resort life, guests lounging by the infinity pool, steel drums warming up for the evening's calypso night, but Miss Marple's focus remained razor-sharp. She returned to her room to jot down her observations in a small notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. The sapphire star, the smuggling ring, the trio's connection, it was all beginning to weave together. But the pattern was incomplete. She needed more. That evening, the resort transformed into a vibrant stage for the calypso night. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting flickering shadows across the open-air pavilion. Guests mingled, their laughter mingling with the infectious beat of drums and guitars. Miss Marple, dressed in a simple lavender frock, blended into the crowd, her eyes scanning for her suspects. She spotted Celeste first, standing near a tiki bar, a glass of rum punch untouched in her hand. Her emerald dress shimmered under the lights, but her expression was distant, almost haunted. Roger Blake was nearby, leaning against a pillar, his dark eyes fixed on Celeste. Miss Marple noted the tension in his posture, like a coiled spring, ready to snap as she sipped her ginger tea, feigning interest in the dancers swaying to the music, and edged closer to Roger. As she passed, she caught a snippet of conversation between him and Celeste, who had approached him with a forced smile. You? Oh, me, Roger, Celeste hissed, her voice barely audible over the music. Don't think you can walk away from this. Roger's jaw tightened. Debts go both ways, Celeste. You're not the only one who's lost something. Miss Marple's heart raced. The word debts echoed Amos's tale of the sapphire. Star's troubled history. She pretended to adjust her shawl, lingering just long enough to hear Roger mutter, "We'll settle it soon." But not here. As Celeste stormed off, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, Miss Marple retreated to a wicker chair, her mind racing. The trio's dynamic was fracturing. Greed, betrayal, or something deeper was at play. She opened her notebook, sketching a rough timeline. The sapphire star's theft in the 1940s, the smuggling ring, the resort's founding in the 1950s, and now this vendetta, simmering beneath the surface. The note from the slashed purse suggested someone was stirring the past, and the trio's reactions pointed to their involvement. She glanced up to see Amos weaving through the crowd, balancing a tray of coconut shells filled with drinks. Catching her eye, he grinned and approached. "Enjoying the music, Miss Marple?" "Very much," she said, her tone warm. "You've been so helpful, Amos. Tell me, do you know anything about Mr. Duval's family? Or perhaps Miss Warrington's?" Amos's grin faded slightly. "Duval's been running this place for years, but his daddy was mixed up in some bad business smuggling, they say, before the resort was built. As for Miss Warrington, her kin used to own land here, way back. Lost it in some scandal. Folks don't talk much about it, but the old ones remember." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. The sapphire star was more than a legend. It was a tether linking the trio to a shared history of loss and betrayal. She thanked Amos, who tipped his cap and moved on, leaving her to her thoughts. As the calypso band struck up a lively tune, Miss Marple's gaze followed Roger, who slipped away from the pavilion toward the beach. Curious, she excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air, and followed at a discreet distance. The moon cast a silver glow over the sand, and Roger's silhouette was unmistakable against the waves. He knelt near a cluster of rocks, digging with his hands, his movements frantic. Miss Marple crouched behind a dune, her heart pounding. Was he searching for the sapphire star, or something else? Before she could decide whether to approach, a figure emerged from the shadows. Celeste, her dress catching the moonlight. She grabbed Roger's arm, her voice sharp. "What are you doing?" she demanded. This wasn't the plan. Roger stood, brushing sand from his hands. "I'm done waiting, Celeste. If it's here, I'm finding it." "You'll ruin everything," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Victor's already suspicious." Miss Marple held her breath, her mind racing. The package, the debts, the digging, it all pointed to a desperate hunt for the sapphire star. She retreated silently, her steps light on the sand, and returned to the pavilion, her notebook now heavy with new details. Back in her room, she sat at the small desk, the hum of the calypso music faint through the open window. She opened her notebook and began sketching a timeline, her pen moving with purpose. The sapphire star's theft, the smuggling ring, the resort's founding. The trio's motives. It was a puzzle, but the pieces were falling into place. Celeste's family had lost their land, Duval's father had been entangled in smuggling, and Roger's bitterness suggested a personal stake. The note, the package, the argument, they were all threads in a vendetta woven from betrayal. As the clock struck midnight, Miss Marple closed her notebook, her eyes bright with determination. The island's beauty masked a dark history, but she was no stranger to uncovering secrets. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper, perhaps with Amos's help or by watching the trio's next move. For now, she was satisfied she had a motive, a mystery, and a plan. The sapphire star was out there, and with it, the truth. The breeze carried the distant rhythm of drums, and Miss Marple smiled. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play. Chapter 4. The tide turns dark. The morning sun spilled over St. Lucia's jagged coastline, painting the sea in hues of sapphire and gold. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a crisp linen blouse and her signature wide-brimmed hat, stood at the edge of Coconut Cove Resort's private dock, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The resort's boat tour to the island's volcanic caves was about to begin, and the air buzzed with the chatter of excited guests. Yet, beneath the tropical allure, Miss Marple sensed an undercurrent of unease, like a riptide waiting to pull someone under. She adjusted her hat, her fingers brushing the brim as she observed the gathering group. Among them were the trio she'd been watching since her arrival. Mr. Antoine Duval, the charming hotelier with a smile that never reached his eyes, Celeste Warrington, the heiress whose polished exterior hid a restless edge, and Roger Blake, the brooding expat whose furtive glances suggested a man haunted by more than the island's legends. Their interactions at the beach bar and welcome dinner had piqued her curiosity, and now, as they boarded the sleek catamaran Star of Lucia, Miss Marple noted Roger's jittery demeanor. He lingered at the boat's railing, his hands gripping the metal as if anchoring himself against an unseen storm. The tour guide, a weary local named Cale with a quick laugh and sun-bleached dreadlocks, clapped his hands to gather attention. "Welcome, folks, to the adventure of a lifetime. Today, we're sailing to the Dragon's Breath Caves, where volcanic rock meets the sea's secrets. Keep your eyes peeled. Legend says treasures hide in those shadows." His grin was infectious. But Miss Marple caught Roger's flinch at the word treasures. She tucked the observation away, her mind already weaving connections to the sapphire star. The cursed necklace Lady Evelyn had mentioned at dinner. As the catamaran sliced through the turquoise waves, Miss Marple settled onto a cushioned bench near the bow, her knitting bag at her side. She pulled out a half-finished scarf, her needles clicking rhythmically as she listened to the guests' chatter. A young couple from London giggled over their snorkeling plans, while a retired professor droned on about geological formations. Celeste, in a flowing white sundress, stood alone at the stern, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Mr. Duval, ever the gracious host, moved among the guests, offering drinks and anecdotes. But Miss Marple noticed he avoided Roger, who was now pacing near the lifeboats. The boat docked at a rocky outcrop where the caves loomed, their jagged mouths framed by moss and mist. Cale led the group ashore, his torch casting eerie shadows on the basalt walls. "These caves were formed thousands of years ago," he explained, his voice echoing. "The locals say spirits guard them, but I say it's just the wind playing tricks." The group laughed, but Miss Marple's attention was on Roger, who lagged behind, his eyes darting to the cave's darker recesses as they ventured deeper. The air grew damp and heavy, the scent of salt mingling with something earthier, like wet stone and secrets. Miss Marple's sensible shoes tapped softly on the uneven floor, her pace deliberate as she watched Celeste linger near a narrow crevice. The heiress's fingers brushed the rock, as if searching for something. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing. Is she looking for a marker, a hiding place? Suddenly, the sky outside roared, and a gust of wind howled through the cave. Cale raised a hand. "Storm's coming, folks. Stay close, we'll head back soon." But the warning came too late. Rain lashed the entrance, and the sea churned, trapping the group inside. The guests huddled together, their voices rising in nervous murmurs. Miss Marple, unfazed, tucked her knitting away and scanned the cave. Her eyes landed on a pile of loose rocks in a corner, where a young tourist, a lanky American named Ethan, was poking around. "Hey, Kale, what's this?" Ethan called, holding up a rusted metal crate half buried under the stones. The group crowded around as Kale pried it open, revealing a stack of weathered ledgers, their pages yellowed and curling. The covers bore the initials SS in faded ink. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Sapphire Star, she thought, her suspicion confirmed. The necklaces smuggling past, hinted at by Amos the groundskeeper, was no mere rumor. Kale frowned, flipping through the brittle pages. "Looks like old shipping records. Probably from the smuggling days, rum, tobacco, maybe worse." He handed a ledger to Ethan, who squinted at the cramped handwriting. Miss Marple edged closer, her eyes catching a date. 1963. The year the Sapphire Star was stolen, according to Lady Evelyn's tale. She noted Roger's pale face and Celeste's sudden stillness, their reactions as telling as the ledgers themselves. "Let me see," Mr. Duval said, his voice smooth but urgent. He took a ledger, his fingers lingering on a page before he slipped it into his jacket. Miss Marple's lips pursed. "He's hiding something," as the group murmured about the find. She knelt by the crate, pretending to adjust her shoe. Her fingers brushed a torn scrap of paper caught in the rocks, its edge marked with a partial Mapajag coastline and a circled X. She slipped it into her sleeve, her heart thumping with the thrill of discovery. The storm eased, and Kale ushered the group back to the catamaran, the ledgers left behind under his assurance that the authorities would handle them. Miss Marple, however, kept her treasure close, her mind buzzing. On the return journey, she sat near the stern, her eyes on Mr. Duval. He stood alone, his back to the group, and as the boat rocked, she saw him tear a page from the ledger he'd taken, letting the fragments flutter into the sea. The act was deliberate, his movements sharp, like a man erasing his own shadow. Back at Coconut Cove, the guests dispersed, their chatter now laced with excitement over the cave's discovery. Miss Marple lingered on the dock, her fingers tracing the scrap in her sleeve. The map fragment showed a cove near the resort, its edges incomplete but suggestive. She glanced at Roger, who was hurrying toward the beach, his shoulders hunched. Celeste, meanwhile, was deep in conversation with Mr. Duval, their heads bent close. Their unraveling, Miss Marple thought, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The vendetta, whatever its shape, was tied to that necklace, and the ledgers were a key she wouldn't let slip away. In her room, she spread the fragment on her desk, its faint lines glowing under the lamp. The X marked a spot near the cliffs, not far from the resort's private beach. She recalled Amos's stories of smugglers' caches hidden in the island's nooks, and the initials SS burned in her mind. The Sapphire Star wasn't just a legend, it was the heart of this tangled web, and the trio's guarded glances told her they knew where it lay. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, Miss Marple sipped a cup of chamomile tea, her thoughts as clear as the island's waters. The vendetta was no longer a whisper, it was a storm brewing, and she was ready to face its fury. With the map fragment safely tucked into her knitting bag, she smiled, content that the tide had turned in her favor. Chapter 5. A Dance of Deception's Coconut Cove Resort's Masquerade Ball was a spectacle of shimmering excess, transforming the open-air pavilion into a dreamscape of mystery and allure. Fairy lights twinkled like stars against the velvet night, their glow reflecting off polished teak floors. The air hummed with the rhythm of a steel drum band, their calypso beats weaving through the chatter of guests adorned in feathered masks and silken costumes. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, stood near a hibiscus-laden trellis, her own mask a delicate creation of teal feathers and silver filigree resting lightly on her face. It was the perfect disguise, not for hiding, but for seeing without being seen. Her eyes, sharp as ever despite the festive chaos, darted across the crowd. The pavilion was a kaleidoscope of movement. Couples twirled in sync with the music, their laughter mingling with the clink of crystal glasses. Waiters glided through the throng, offering trays of mango-infused cocktails and coconut-dusted canapes. Yet beneath the revelry, Miss Marple sensed a current of unease, like a riptide lurking beneath calm waters. Her mind was fixed on the trio she'd been watching since her arrival. Mr. Antoine Duval, the charming hotelier with a smile too polished to trust, Celeste Warrington, the heiress whose elegance masked a guarded intensity, and Roger Blake, the brooding expat whose eyes held the weight of unspoken grudges. Tonight, Miss Marple had a purpose. The cryptic note from the slashed purse, the whispers of the sapphire star, and the trio's furtive exchanges had woven a thread she intended to unravel. The masquerade, with its anonymity and loosened tongues, was the perfect stage for secrets to slip. She adjusted her shawl, a gossamer blend of cream silk embroidered with tiny shells, and sipped her ginger tea, its warmth grounding her amidst the swirl of intrigue. The band struck up a livelier tune, and the dance floor surged with masked figures. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Celeste, who stood near a towering ice sculpture of a marlin, her emerald gown catching the light like the sea itself. Her mask, a cascade of black lace studded with pearls, did little to conceal the tension in her posture. She was speaking to Roger, whose own mask, a stark black domino, gave him the air of a highwayman. Their conversation was hushed, but their body language screamed discord. Roger's hand gestured sharply, slicing the air, while Celeste's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Miss Marple edged closer, weaving through the crowd with the grace of a woman who'd navigated village gossip for decades. She paused by a pillar draped in jasmine vines, close enough to catch fragments of their exchange. "You promised it would be clean," Celeste hissed, her voice low but sharp as a coral reef. "No one was supposed to get hurt." Roger leaned in, his tone a growl. "Don't play innocent, Celeste. You knew the stakes when you signed on. Debts don't pay themselves." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Debts? The word hung in her mind, heavy with implication. Was it financial ruin that bound them, or something deeper, a vendetta? As the bar conversation had hinted, she filed the thought away, her mental knitting needles clicking into place. Before she could eavesdrop further, a ripple of movement drew her attention. Mr. Duval, resplendent in a gold-trimmed tailcoat and a mask shaped like a sunburst, was gliding toward the center of the pavilion. He clapped his hands, the sound cutting through the music, and the band softened to a gentle hum. "Ladies and gentlemen," Duval's voice carried the warm cadence of the islands, but Miss Marple noted the practiced charm, like a performer stepping into a spotlight. "Welcome to Coconut Cove's masquerade of mysteries. Tonight, we dance, we dream, and perhaps we uncover secrets beneath our masks. But first, a toast to new beginnings and hidden truths." The crowd raised their glasses, a chorus of clinks echoing. Miss Marple lifted her teacup, her eyes never leaving Duval. His toast was innocuous enough, but the phrase "hidden truths" felt like a gauntlet thrown. Did he know she was watching? Or was he taunting someone else entirely? As the music resumed, Miss Marple drifted toward a buffet table laden with tropical delicacies: grilled lobster skewers, pineapple tarts, and bowls of vibrant mango salsa. She pretended to inspect a plate of jerk-spiced shrimp, using the moment to scan the room. Her earlier conversation with Amos, the groundskeeper, had planted a seed. He'd mentioned Duval's father, a man named Claude Duval, who'd been jailed decades ago for smuggling the sapphire star. That cursed necklace had been at the heart of it. Could Antoine Duval be carrying his father's grudge or his guilt? A sudden commotion snapped her from her thoughts. Across the pavilion, near a portrait of the resort's founder, Sir Reginald Warrington, a woman shrieked. The crowd parted like waves, revealing a shocking sight. The portrait, a grand oil painting of Sir Reginald in a naval uniform, had been defaced. Red paint, vivid as blood, spelled out a single word across his face. Revenge. Gasps rippled through the guests. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with fear but with the thrill of a puzzle taking shape. She moved closer, her small frame slipping easily through the gawking crowd. The paint was still wet, dripping in crimson streaks onto the mahogany frame. Sir Reginald, Celeste's great-grandfather, had built Coconut Cove into a haven for the elite. Why would someone target his image now? She glanced at the trio. Duval was already at the portrait, his face a mask of controlled outrage as he directed staff to cover it with a cloth. Celeste stood frozen, her hand at her throat, her eyes wide behind her mask. Roger, meanwhile, had retreated to the edge of the pavilion, his gaze darting toward the exits. Miss Marple's instincts hummed. The act was bold, public, and deeply personal. This was no random vandalism, it was a message, tied to the vendetta she'd sensed from the start. As the crowd buzzed with speculation, Miss Marple caught sight of Amos near the bar, his weathered face tense as he watched the scene. She made her way to him, her steps deliberate but unhurried, like a tourist admiring the decor. "Amos," she said softly, her voice warm as she leaned against the bar. "Quite a stir, isn't it? That portrait Sir Reginald, wasn't it? Celeste's family, I believe." Amos nodded, his eyes flicking toward Celeste. "Miss, Sir Reginald built this place, but there's bad blood from those days. His family lost the resort after a scandal smuggling. They say Celeste's uncle was mixed up in it. Folks don't forget." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity, though her mind was racing. "Smuggling, you say? Connected to that necklace? Perhaps. The sapphire star." Amos hesitated, then lowered his voice. "That's the talk. Claude Duval, Antoine's father, took the fall for it. Some say he was framed. Others say he was guilty as sin. Either way, the Warringtons got out, and the Duvals stayed. Bad blood, like I said." She thanked him with a smile, her mind stitching together the threads. Celeste's family had owned the resort before a scandal likely tied to the Sapphire Star forced its sale. Claude Duval had gone to prison, leaving Antoine to inherit the resort and, perhaps, a grudge. Roger's role was less clear, but his argument with Celeste about debts suggested he was no bystander. Was the defaced portrait a warning to Celeste, a taunt to Duval, or a declaration of war from Roger? The band struck up again, a slower melody to soothe the rattled guests. Miss Marple returned to her vantage point by the trellis, her fingers brushing the feathered edge of her mask. The word revenge lingered in her thoughts, as vivid as the paint on the canvas. This vendetta wasn't just about a stolen necklace, it was about legacy, betrayal, and the ghosts of a family's fall. She spotted Celeste moving toward the dance floor, now alone, her movements stiff as if shaking off a chill. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps light, her shawl trailing like a whisper. Celeste paused near a palm-fringed balcony overlooking the ocean, the moonlight casting her silhouette in silver. Roger appeared moments later, his mask now tucked into his pocket, his face raw with frustration. "You can't keep dodging this," he said, his voice low but urgent. "We had a deal, Celeste. You owe me." Celeste's laugh was brittle, like glass about to shatter. "Owe you? After what you did, you're as much to blame as he is." Miss Marple, hidden behind a curtain of bougainvillea, held her breath. Did she mean Duval? Or someone else entirely? The conversation was cut short as a waiter approached, offering drinks. Roger waved him off and stalked away, leaving Celeste staring out at the sea. Miss Marple retreated to a wicker chair, her mind a whirl of connections. The defaced portrait, the smuggling scandal, the trio's fractured alliance, it all pointed to a vendetta rooted in the resort's past. Celeste's family had lost everything. Duval's father had paid a price, and Roger was entangled in their shared history. The sapphire star was the key, but was it the prize they sought, or the symbol of their pain? As the ball wound down, guests began to drift toward their villas, their masks slipping to reveal flushed, tipsy faces. Miss Marple lingered, her teacup long empty, her thoughts alight with possibilities. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a vandalized gravestone had unmasked a decades-old feud. The principle was the same: hurt runs deep, and revenge, when it surfaces, is never subtle. She rose, her shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders, and made her way to her room. The night air was thick with the scent of frangipani, but her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle. The defaced portrait was a declaration, the trio's tension a crack in their plan. She was certain now. The vendetta was personal, aimed at the heart of Coconut Cove itself. The resort, with its polished facade and buried secrets, was both stage and target. In her room, Miss Marple lit a small lamp and sat at the desk, her knitting bag untouched. Instead, she pulled out a notebook, its pages filled with neat, looping script. She jotted down her observations: Celeste family shame, loss of legacy, Duval father's disgrace, inherited power, Roger outsider, yet central to their pact, sapphire star stolen, cursed, the spark of their grudge. She closed the notebook, her lips curving in a quiet, satisfied smile. The masquerade had been a dance of deceptions, but Miss Marple had seen through the masks. Tomorrow, she would dig deeper, perhaps with Amos's help or a visit to the island's archives. For now, she was content. The pieces were falling into place, and the vendetta, like a poorly wear-upon scarf, was beginning to unravel as she prepared for bed. The distant sound of waves lapping the shore mingled with the echo of the steel drums. Miss Marple extinguished the lamp, her mind alight with the thrill of the chase. The sapphire star was out there, hidden in the shadows of Coconut Cove, and she would find it along with the truth it guarded. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Sand. Caribbean sun hung low, painting the sky in hues of tangerine and rose as Miss Jane Marple adjusted her wide-brimmed straw hat. The beachcombing excursion at Coconut Cove Resort was in full swing, with guests fanning out across the powdery sands of St. Lucia's western shore, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic crash of waves. Miss Marple, ever observant, clutched her woven basket, her sharp eyes scanning not just for shells but for the subtle tells of human nature. The morning's breeze carried a hint of salt and mystery, and she felt the familiar prickle of anticipation. The sapphire star, that elusive cursed necklace, was weaving its spell, and she was determined to unravel its secrets. The group, a mix of sunburned tourists and curious locals, spread out under the guidance of Amos, the groundskeeper whose warm smile and weathered hands belied a deep knowledge of the island's lore. Miss Marple had taken a liking to him, his stories of St. Lucia's past laced with a quiet wisdom that reminded her of her own village. Confidante back in St. Mary Mead. Today, she positioned herself near the edge of the group, close enough to hear Amos's instructions but far enough to observe the trio she'd been watching. Mr. Duval, the charming hotelier with a smile to polished; Celeste Warrington, the heiress whose elegance masked a guarded edge; and Roger Blake, the brooding expat whose eyes darted like a cornered animal's. "Mind the tide pools, folks," Amos called, his voice rich with the island's cadence. "You'll find conch shells, maybe some coral bits, but don't go disturbing the crabs. They got their own business to mind." The group chuckled, and Miss Marple smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the knitting needles tucked in her basket. A habit, not a necessity, for her hands were rarely idle when her mind was at work. She knelt near a cluster of seaweed-strewn rocks, her floral skirt brushing the sand. The other guests were engrossed in their hunt, bending over to inspect shells or squealing as waves nipped their toes. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a patch of sand near a gnarled piece of driftwood, where the grains seemed disturbed, as if someone had recently dug there. Her heart quickened. A clue, perhaps, she thought, her mind flicking back to the cryptic note from Chapter 2. The past never stays buried. She glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, and began to sift through the sand with a small trowel from her basket. Her fingers brushed something hard, cool to the touch. With careful precision, she unearthed a small, tarnished locket, its silver surface etched with delicate filigree. She turned it over, noting the initial CW engraved on the back. Celeste Warrington. She wondered, her mind racing. Or perhaps another from the same family. Given Amos's earlier hint that Celeste's kin had once owned the resort, before a scandal forced its sale. The locket's clasp was stiff, but with a gentle nudge, it sprang open, revealing a faded photograph of a young woman, her features strikingly similar to Celeste's high cheekbones. A defiant tilt to her chin. Tucked behind the photo was a tiny scrap of paper, yellowed with age, bearing a single word: star. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The sapphire star. This locket was no mere trinket. It was a thread in the tapestry of the vendetta she'd sensed. Since her arrival, she slipped it into her basket, covering it with a skein of yarn, and stood, brushing sand from her hands. Her eyes swept the beach, landing on Roger Blake, who stood apart from the group, his gaze fixed on the cliffs in the distance. He was sketching something in a small notebook, his movements quick and furtive. "What are you hiding, Mr. Blake?" she mused as she approached Amos, who was helping a child free a shell from a tide pool. "Amos," she said softly, her voice warm, but probing, "you've lived here all your life, haven't you? Ever come across a locket like this?" She described it vaguely, careful not to reveal too much. Amos's eyes flickered with recognition, but he kept his tone casual. "Plenty of lost things wash up here, Miss Marple. Folks leave all sorts behind: rings, lockets, secrets." He paused, glancing toward Celeste, who was sifting sand with an air of distraction. "Some say the Warringtons left more than just money troubles when they lost this place. Old stories. Mind you, not my place to stir 'em." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging his words. "Old stories have a way of resurfacing, don't they?" she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Amos gave her a knowing look before turning back to the child, and she felt a quiet satisfaction. He'd given her more than he realized as. The group moved farther down the beach. Miss Marple lingered near the driftwood, watching Celeste. The heiress was now alone, her silk scarf fluttering in the breeze as she stared out at the sea. Her posture was rigid, her hands clenched. Miss Marple's instincts told her Celeste was wrestling with something, guilt, perhaps, or fear. She made a mental note to probe further but shifted her attention to Roger, who had wandered toward a cluster of palm trees, still clutching his notebook. She followed at a discreet distance, her sandals silent on the sand. Roger stopped near a low dune, glancing around before kneeling to inspect something. Miss Marple crouched behind a palm, her heart steady despite the thrill of pursuit. He was marking something in his notebook, a map, she realized, as she caught a glimpse of lines and symbols. The cliffs, the cove, a jagged outline that could only be the island's rugged northern edge. A treasure hunt? She thought, her mind flashing to the Sapphire Star's legend. Mr. Blake, she called, stepping forward with a disarming smile. Found something interesting. Roger started, snapping the notebook shut. His face, usually shadowed, flushed with annoyance. Just sketching the view. Miss Marple, planning a hike tomorrow. His voice was smooth, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Oh, how lovely, she said, her tone airy. The cliffs are quite striking, aren't they? Though I'd be careful, those paths can be treacherous. She tilted her head, her gaze lingering just long enough to unsettle him. I once knew a young man in St. Mary Mead who got himself into trouble sketching maps. Turned out he was looking for something he shouldn't have. Roger's jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh. Just a hobby, ma'am. Nothing to worry about. He tipped his hat and strode off, leaving Miss Marple with a quiet thrill of triumph. He was lying, and she knew it. The excursion wound down, and the group began to disperse, their baskets brimming with shells and sea glass. Miss Marple, however, was preoccupied with the locket now hidden in her knitting bag. She returned to her room, a cozy suite with a balcony overlooking the turquoise bay, and sat at the small wicker desk. She examined the locket under the light of a seashell lamp, noting the craftsmanship expensive, likely from the 1940s. The era of the Sapphire Star's theft. The word star on the scrap of paper was written in a hurried hand, as if its writer had been desperate. She tucked the locket into a hidden pocket of her bag, satisfied it was safe for now. That evening, the resort hosted a steel drum performance on the beach, the air alive with the metallic ping of drums and the scent of jerk-spiced fish grilling. Nearby, Miss Marple, dressed in a light linen dress, mingled with the guests, her eyes never straying far from the trio. Mr. Duval was in his element, charming a group of American tourists with tales of St. Lucia's pirate history. Celeste, however, sat alone at a high-top table, nursing a glass of rum punch, her gaze distant. Roger was nowhere to be seen. Miss Marple approached Celeste, her demeanor as warm as the evening breeze. Miss Warrington, you seem lost in thought. Is the island not to your liking? Celeste blinked, startled, then offered a tight smile. It's beautiful, Miss Marple. Just brings back memories. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. Memories can be heavy things, Miss Marple said, settling into a chair beside her. I find they often tie us to places or people we'd rather forget. Your family had ties here, didn't they? Celeste's fingers tightened around her glass. You've been talking to Amos, she said, not accusingly but with a hint of resignation. Yes, my family owned this resort once. Before, well, before things went wrong. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind racing. Loss can leave such a mark, can't it? I knew a family in my village who lost their home to a scandal. It changed them, made them vengeful, almost. She watched Celeste's reaction, noting the flicker of unease in her eyes. Vengeful, Celeste echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I suppose some might feel that way, but I'm just here to enjoy the island. She stood abruptly, her drink untouched. Excuse me, Miss Marple. I need some air. As Celeste walked away, Miss Marple sipped her own glass of lemonade, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Celeste's family had lost the resort, likely due to the Sapphire Star's scandal. The lock's initials and the photograph pointed to a personal connection, perhaps a mother or aunt. Roger's map suggested he was searching for something hidden, likely the necklace itself. And Mr. Duval, his father's smuggling past, mentioned by Amos, tied him to the same web. The vendetta, she sensed, was not just about the necklace but about reclaiming something lost: pride, wealth, or power. The drums reached a crescendo, and Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the bar. A tourist had tripped over a rope anchoring a tiki torch, and in the chaos, she saw Roger slip back into the crowd, his notebook tucked under his arm. He caught her eye for a moment, and she offered a serene smile, knowing it would unnerve him. You're not as clever as you think, Mr. Blake, she thought. Later that night, as the resort quieted and the stars glittered above, Miss Marple sat on her balcony, her knitting needles clicking softly. She reviewed the day's findings: the locket, Roger's map, Celeste's guarded words. The Sapphire Star was more than a jewel. It was a symbol of betrayal, and the trio's motives were tangled in its history. She sketched a mental timeline, connecting the deaths from the necklace's theft to the present vendetta. The locket, she decided, was key evidence of a personal stake in the mystery. As she prepared for bed, she hid the locket in a false compartment of her suitcase, a trick she'd learned from a particularly cunning spinster in St. Mary Mead. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing she was one step closer to unraveling the trio's scheme. The Sapphire Star was out there, buried in the island's secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to find it before they did. Tomorrow, she would set her next trap, using the locket to stir the waters and see what truths rose to the surface. The chapter closed with the distant sound of waves, a reminder that even in paradise, secrets could not stay buried forever. Miss Marple turned off the lamp, her mind alight with possibilities, content that the game was well and truly afoot. Chapter 7. The heat of suspicion. The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly on Coconut Cove Resort, its golden rays glinting off the turquoise waves that lapped at the shore. Miss Jane Marple, perched delicately on her balcony overlooking the lush gardens, sipped her morning tea, her sharp eyes scanning the vibrant scene below. The air was heavy with the scent of hibiscus and salt, but beneath the idyllic veneer, she sensed a storm brewing, a vendetta, as she'd overheard at the beach bar. Tied to the legendary Sapphire Star necklace, her knitting needles clicked softly in her lap, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant calypso music drifting from the poolside. She was no stranger to secrets, and St. Lucia, with its sultry charm, was proving to be a treasure trove of them. The previous day's discovery of the locket on the beach, its initials matching those in the old ledgers from the volcanic caves, had sharpened her focus. The hotelier, Mr. Antoine Duval, the secretive heiress, Celeste Warrington, and the brooding expat, Roger Blake, each played a part in this unfolding drama, their guarded glances and hushed exchanges weaving a web of suspicion. Miss Marple's mind, as keen as ever, was already threading the needle through their tangled motives. But this morning, a new disturbance had caught her attention, the plume of dark smoke curling upward from the resort's storage shed, tucked behind a grove of coconut palms. She set her teacup down and rose, her light cotton dress swishing as she made her way downstairs. The resort was alive with activity guests lounging by the infinity pool, staff bustling with trays of tropical cocktails, but the smoke drew a small crowd near the shed. Miss Marple slipped through the gathering, her unassuming presence barely noticed. The shed's wooden door hung ajar, its interior a charred mess of crates and papers. The acrid smell of burnt wood stung her nose. "What a dreadful mess," she murmured to a nearby waiter, a young man with a nervous smile. "Yes, Mum," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Happened just before dawn. Fire brigades on their way, but it's mostly out now." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she spotted Mr. Duval fleeing the scene. Her heart quickened at the confirmation of her suspicions, but her expression remained as placid as ever. "Indeed, it seems trouble follows me even to paradise," she said lightly, turning back toward the main building. She didn't linger. She had work to do. The local fire brigade arrived, their red truck a stark contrast against the lush greenery. They moved efficiently, dousing the last of the smoldering embers. Miss Marple overheard snippets of their conversation, something about faulty wiring, though no one seemed certain. She made a mental note to inquire further. Faulty wiring in a modern resort like this? Unlikely, she thought, her mind already spinning possibilities. Arson, perhaps, and if so, by whom? The trio Duval, Celeste, Roger came to mind, their uneasy alliance a constant puzzle in her thoughts. She returned to her room to change for her planned visit to the local library, a modest but well-kept building in the nearby town of Soufriere. The library, a quiet haven of ceiling fans and wooden shelves, held a collection of historical records that might shed light on the Sapphire Star's murky past. Settling at a worn table, she requested a stack of old newspapers and journals, her fingers deftly flipping through brittle pages. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Du Bois, hovered nearby, intrigued by the Englishwoman's meticulous note-taking. "Looking for something special, Miss Marple?" Mrs. Du Bois asked, her voice warm with island hospitality. "Oh, just a bit of local history," Miss Marple replied with a smile, her tone as airy as the tropical breeze. "The island has such a fascinating past." Her search soon bore fruit. A 1965 article in the St. Lucia Gazette detailed the arrest of a man named Henry Duval, Antoine's father. She deduced for smuggling gemstones, including the fabled Sapphire Star necklace, stolen from a wealthy French tourist. The article described a botched heist, a betrayal among thieves, and a necklace that vanished into the island's shadows. Another clipping, dated a year later, mentioned Celeste Warrington's uncle, a minor player in the scandal, disgraced and bankrupted. Roger Blake's name appeared nowhere, but Miss Marple's instincts told her he fit into this puzzle perhaps. As a descendant of the betrayed thief, nursing a grudge across generations, she scribbled notes in her small notebook, her handwriting neat despite the heat making her blouse cling to her skin. The connections were forming. Henry Duval's imprisonment, Celeste's family's fall, the missing necklace, a vendetta rooted in greed and betrayal. But how did Roger fit? A hired hand, perhaps, or a relative with a personal stake. She needed more evidence, and the fire was a fresh clue. Destroying records suggested someone was covering tracks leading to the Sapphire Star. She was certain. Back at the resort, Miss Marple sipped a chilled hibiscus tea by the pool, her eyes scanning the crowd. Roger Blake lounged in the shade, his dark sunglasses hiding his gaze, but his tense posture betrayed unease. He avoided the police inspector, a stout man in a crisp uniform who was questioning staff near the shed. Miss Marple noted Roger's quick retreat to his bungalow when the inspector turned his way. Guilty conscience, she mused. Or just a dislike for authority. She'd find out soon enough. Celeste Warrington, elegant in a white sundress, emerged from the spa, her cool demeanor faltering when she spotted the inspector. Miss Marple caught the fleeting panic in her eyes before she masked it with a practiced smile. Antoine Duval, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen, a curious absence for the hotelier after such an incident. Miss Marple's fingers tapped her glass, her mind mapping the trio's connections. The fire, the ledgers, the locket, the sapphire. Starrett was a puzzle of human nature, her specialty. She decided to visit Amos, the groundskeeper, in his small office near the gardens. His weathered face lit up at her approach, his hands busy with a pruning shear. Miss Marple, not out enjoying the beach? I've had my fill of sand for now, she said warmly. Amos, what do you make of that fire? He frowned, setting the shear down. Bad business. Old records in their resort history, guest logs, that sort of thing. Most of it's gone now. Anything valuable? She asked, her tone casual. Amos shrugged. Maybe to someone. Lot of it was from the old days, before Mr. Duval's family bought the place. Could have been something about that necklace you mentioned. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. Any chance it wasn't an accident? Amos's eyes widened, then narrowed. You think someone said it? That's a bold guess, ma'am. Just a thought, she said lightly, but her mind was racing. The shed's destruction was no coincidence. Someone wanted those records gone. She thanked Amos and strolled back to the main building, her parasol shielding her from the sun. The trio's motives were clearer now. Revenge, greed, or both. But the fire suggested desperation, a move to erase evidence. She needed to corner one of them, and soon. That evening, the resort hosted a seafood barbecue on the beach, the air thick with the scent of grilled snapper and coconut rice. Miss Marple, dressed in a pale blue shawl over her dress, mingled with the guests, her ears tuned to their chatter. She spotted Celeste near a tiki torch, her laughter brittle as she spoke with a wealthy guest. Roger sat alone at the bar, nursing a rum punch, his eyes darting toward the inspector lingering nearby. Mr. Duval finally appeared, his charm turned up as he reassured guests about the minor incident with the shed. Miss Marple's lips twitched. His composure was admirable, but not flawless. She approached Roger, her smile disarming. Mr. Blake, enjoying the evening? He stiffened, then relaxed. Miss Marple, right? It's a fine night. Just a shame about that fire. Quite, she agreed, sitting beside him. Any theories about it? He shrugged, his fingers tight around his glass. Old wiring. Probably. This place has its quirks. Perhaps, she said, her tone gentle but probing. Though it's odd, don't you think? Old records burning up like that. His jaw twitched, but he sipped his drink. Accidents happen. Not always, she replied, her eyes sharp. Behind her serene expression, she let the moment pass. But his reaction confirmed her suspicions. He knew more than he was saying. She excused herself and joined Lady Evelyn Harcourt, her old friend, at a table laden with tropical fruit. Jane, you're awfully quiet tonight, Lady Evelyn remarked, slicing a mango. Just thinking, dear, Miss Marple said. This island has more secrets than I expected. Lady Evelyn laughed. You always find the shadows, don't you? It's a gift, Miss Marple said with a wry smile, her mind still on the trio. She spent the rest of the evening observing them, her mental map of their connections growing sharper. The fire was no accident, it was a calculated move to bury the past. But Miss Marple was not one to let secrets stay buried. As the night wound down, she retired to her room, her notebook open on the desk. She sketched a diagram linking Henry Duval, Celeste's uncle, and the Sapphire Star. Roger's role was still unclear, but the fire pointed to his involvement. She closed the notebook, satisfied with her progress. The heat of suspicion was rising, and she was ready to turn up the flame. Chapter 8. A moonlit revelation. The Caribbean night draped Coconut Cove Resort in a velvet shroud, the moon casting silver ribbons across the inky sea. Miss Jane Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, sat on a wicker chair at the edge of the stargazing event, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders despite the balmy air. The resort's guests milled about, their voices a soft hum beneath the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the distant lap of waves. A telescope, perched on a tripod, gleamed under a portable lantern, its lens aimed at the glittering canopy above. Miss Marple's eyes, however, were not on the stars but on the trio she had been quietly studying. Mr. Duval, the suave hotelier, Celeste Warrington, the enigmatic heiress, and Roger Blake, the brooding expat whose shadowed glances spoke of secrets. The stargazing event had been billed as a highlight of the week, with a local astronomer, Dr. Leela Moreau, guiding guests through constellations like Orion and Cassiopeia. Her voice, warm and melodic, carried over the crowd as she pointed out the Pleiades, her braided hair catching the moonlight. Miss Marple, however, was more intrigued by the human constellations forming around her. She had positioned herself near a hibiscus hedge, close enough to overhear snippets of conversation, but far enough to remain unnoticed, her knitting needles clicking softly as a prop to her vigilance. Celeste stood near the telescope, her silk shawl slipping off one shoulder as she leaned in to peer through the lens. Her face, illuminated by the lantern, betrayed a flicker of unease, her eyes darting toward Roger, who lounged against a palm tree, a glass of rum in hand. Mr. Duval, ever the gracious host, circulated among the guests, his smile polished but his movements hurried, as if he were chasing a thought he couldn't quite catch. Miss Marple's fingers paused on her knitting, her mind weaving a pattern from their subtle cues. The way Celeste's hand tightened on her shawl when Roger glanced her way, the way Mr. Duval's laugh faltered when he passed the telescope. Something was afoot, and she was determined to unravel it. Dr. Moreau's voice broke through her thoughts. Now, if you'll direct your attention to the east, you'll see Scorpio rising, its tail curling like a warning. The guests murmured, some adjusting their own binoculars, others scribbling notes in the star charts provided. Miss Marple, however, noted a different kind of warning. Celeste had stepped away from the telescope, her posture rigid, and was now whispering fiercely to Roger near the edge of the clearing. Their voices were low, but Miss Marple's keen ears caught fragments. Family debt, not yours to claim. And Roger's curt reply, you promised me my share. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene but her mind racing. A family debt, she mused, likely tied to the Sapphire Star, the cursed necklace that had haunted the islands, lore for decades. Her earlier discoveries, Amos's tales of smuggling, the ledgers in the cave, the slashed purse with its ominous note pointed to a vendetta rooted in that glittering relic. But what role did each of the trio play? Was Celeste the orchestrator, driven by her family's lost legacy? Was Roger a hired hand, or something more personal? And Mr. Duval, his father's smuggling past loomed large. But was he protecting the resort or exploiting it? As Dr. Moreau invited guests to take turns at the telescope, a small commotion erupted. A middle-aged tourist, Mrs. Pennington, with a penchant for loud floral dresses, exclaimed, "My goodness, where's the telescope gone?" The crowd turned, puzzled, as Dr. Moreau rushed to the tripod, now conspicuously empty. The lantern's glow revealed only the tripod's legs. The telescope itself vanished into the night. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A missing telescope was no mere prank, not with the trio's tension crackling like static. She rose, tucking her knitting into her bag, and approached the group, her step slow but deliberate. "Oh dear," she said, her voice mild. "How unfortunate. Perhaps it was misplaced in the excitement." Dr. Moreau, flustered, shook her head. "It was right here moments ago. I only stepped away to fetch a chart." The guests buzzed with speculation, some suggesting a thief, others blaming the rum punch. Mr. Duval appeared, his face a mask of concern. "I'll have the staff search the grounds immediately," he said, his voice smooth but his eyes scanning the crowd too quickly. Miss Marple noted, as the guests dispersed to help search. Miss Marple lingered near the hibiscus hedge, her gaze following Roger, who had slipped away toward the cliffs. Celeste, meanwhile, hovered near Mr. Duval, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple's instincts prickled. The telescope's disappearance was no accident, it was a distraction, or perhaps a clue. She recalled the ledgers from the cave, marked with SS, and the fragment she'd salvaged. Its ink smudged but hinting at a location near the cliffs. Could the telescope be part of their hunt for the sapphire star, slipping away from the group? Miss Marple followed a narrow path toward the cliffs, her sensible shoes silent on the sandy trail. The moonlit sea stretched endlessly to her left, its waves whispering secrets. Ahead, she spotted Roger's silhouette, crouched near a rocky outcrop. He was examining something, a glint of metal in the moonlight. The telescope, she realized, half hidden in a crevice. But what caught her attention was Roger's hand, brushing against a small stone, dislodging it to reveal a smudged mark on the rock, a fingerprint, glistening faintly in the damp air. Miss Marple's mind whirred. A fingerprint could be telling, but she needed more. She stepped closer, feigning a stumble. "Oh my," she gasped, loud enough for Roger to hear. He spun around, his face taut, and quickly stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "Miss Marple, what are you doing out here?" His tone was light, but his eyes were wary. "Just taking a stroll," she said, her smile disarming. "The stars are so lovely, aren't they? But I see you've found the telescope. How fortunate." She gestured toward the crevice, her tone innocent but her gaze sharp. Roger hesitated, then laughed, a touch too loudly. "Yes, must have rolled down here. Clumsy of someone." He retrieved the telescope, holding it awkwardly, and began walking back toward the clearing. Miss Marple followed, her eyes lingering on his hands. She'd seen something else, a ring on his left hand, silver with a distinctive crest. It wasn't Roger's ring, she realized with a jolt. It matched the one Mr. Duval wore, a family heirloom he'd flashed at the masquerade ball. Back at the clearing, the guests were reassembling. Dr. Moreau relieved to see the telescope returned. "Where was it?" she asked, brushing sand from its lens. "Near the cliffs," Roger said quickly. "Must have been a prank." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. but her mind was alight. The fingerprint on the rock, the ring it pointed to Mr. Duval. Had he hidden the telescope to divert attention, or was it a signal to his accomplices? And why was Roger wearing his ring? A trade, a theft, or a deeper alliance? As the stargazing resumed, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. She watched Celeste, now standing alone, her eyes fixed on the sea. The heiress's earlier words family decoded in Miss Marple's mind. Celeste's family had once owned the resort, Amos had said, before a scandal forced its sale. Was she seeking the sapphire star to restore her family's honor, or to settle a score? And Roger, with his maps and jittery demeanor, his role was murkier. Perhaps a hired hand turned rogue. Mr. Duval, with his polished charm and smuggler's lineage, seemed the linchpin, but his motives remained elusive. The night grew late, and the guests began to drift back to their villas. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the trio as they parted ways, Celeste to her suite, Roger to the bar, Mr. Duval to his office. She rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and made her way to the cliff path once more. The fingerprint on the rock was still there, smudged but distinct. She bent closer, her scarf brushing the ground, and confirmed her suspicion. The crest of Mr. Duval's ring was faintly etched in the mark. It wasn't conclusive, but it was enough to fuel her theory. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat at the small desk, her notebook open. She sketched a diagram, linking the trio to the sapphire star. Celeste's family debt, Roger's maps, Mr. Duval's ring. They were hunting the necklace. She was certain, hidden somewhere on the island. The telescope's theft was a ploy, perhaps to search the cliffs under cover of chaos. But why now? What had sparked this vendetta anew? She tapped her pencil against the page, her thoughts drifting to her village of St. Mary Mead. There, she'd seen similar patterns, greed masked as justice, old wounds festering beneath polite smiles. The sapphire star wasn't just a jewel. It was a symbol of betrayal, and the trio's alliance was fraying under its weight. She needed to push them further, to expose their cracks. As the moon dipped toward the horizon, Miss Marple closed her notebook, her plan taking shape. She would plant a seed, a rumor, perhaps, that the sapphire star's hiding place was near. If she could stir their greed, their distrust would do the rest. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with the quiet thrill of the chase. The night was still, but the game was very much afoot. The next morning, Miss Marple joined Amos for tea at the staff canteen, a humble spot tucked behind the kitchens. The groundskeeper's eyes lit up as she shared her idea. "Amos," she said, her voice conspiratorial, "what if we let slip that I found a clue to the sapphire star? Nothing specific, just enough to rattle our friends." Amos grinned, his teeth bright against his weathered face. "You're a sly one, Miss Marple. I'll spread the word, say I heard it from a guest who overheard you. They'll be buzzing like bees." She nodded, pleased. Amos's network of staff and locals was a gold mine, and his loyalty to the island made him a perfect ally. By noon, the rumor was circulating. Miss Marple, sipping lemonade on the veranda, overheard a maid whispering to a bellhop about the old lady's discovery. She smiled into her glass, her eyes scanning the pool area where Celeste lounged, her sunglasses hiding her expression. Roger was at the bar, his posture tense, and Mr. Duval was nowhere to be seen, likely in his office, plotting his next move at the evening's rum-tasting event. The air was thick with anticipation. The trio's nerves were palpable. Celeste's fingers drummed on her glass. Roger's eyes darted to every corner, and Mr. Duval's smile was tighter than usual. Miss Marple, dressed in a simple linen dress, moved through the crowd, her demeanor unassuming but her senses sharp. She paused near Celeste, offering a gentle smile. "Such a lovely evening," she said. "I do hope we all find what we're looking for." Celeste's gaze flickered, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing. "Yes," she murmured. "I hope so too." Miss Marple moved on, her heart quickening. The bait was set, and the trio was circling. She needed only to wait for their next move, a slip, a confession, a betrayal. As the night deepened, Miss Marple retired to her balcony, her notebook open once more. She sketched a map of the cliffs, marking the spot where the telescope had been hidden. The fingerprint, the ring, the whispered debts, they were pieces of a puzzle, and she was close to seeing its shape. The sapphire star was out there, and with it, the truth. She closed her eyes, the sea's rhythm soothing her, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a hunter nearing her quarry. Tomorrow, she would tighten the net. Chapter 9. The bait is set. Tropical sun hung low over St. Lucia's Coconut Cove Resort, casting a golden sheen across the turquoise waves that lapped lazily at the shore. The air was thick with the scent of hibiscus and sea salt, a heady perfume that belied the undercurrent of intrigue swirling among the resort's guests. Miss Jane Marple, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat, sat on her balcony, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she surveyed the bustling scene below. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, missed nothing, not the nervous twitch of a guest's hand, nor the fleeting glance exchanged between two figures by the pool. She was, as always, a quiet sentinel, piecing together the puzzle of human motives with the precision of a master weaver. Her latest gambit had been set in motion that morning. Over breakfast, she had casually mentioned to Amos, the groundskeeper with a penchant for gossip, that she'd stumbled upon a clue to the whereabouts of the sapphire star, the legendary necklace at the heart of the resort's whispered vendetta. It was a calculated lie, delivered with the innocent air of an elderly spinster sharing a tidbit of news. Amos, with his warm smile and eager ear, had taken the bait as surely as a fish snapping at a lure. By noon, the rumor had spread like wildfire through the resort's staff and guests, a spark that Miss Marple knew would ignite the suspicions of her three suspects: Mr. Duval, the suave hotelier; Celeste Warrington, the secretive heiress; and Roger Blake, the brooding expat. Now, as the afternoon waned, Miss Marple prepared for the evening's rum-tasting event, a festive affair promised to draw every guest to the resort's open-air pavilion. She chose a simple linen dress in pale lavender, its modesty belying the keen mind beneath. Her plan was to observe the trio's reactions to her rumor, to watch their carefully constructed facades crack under the pressure of greed and distrust. The sapphire star, with its cursed history and glittering allure, was the key to unraveling their shared secret, and Miss Marple was determined to turn the key tonight. The pavilion was a vision of Caribbean splendor, its wooden beams draped with fairy lights that twinkled like stars against the deepening indigo sky. Calypso music drifted from a steel drum band, their rhythms mingling with the chatter of guests sipping amber-hued rum from crystal glasses. Miss Marple accepted a glass of mango-infused rum punch, its sweetness masking a fiery kick, and positioned herself near a potted palm, her vantage point offering a clear view of the crowd. She sipped sparingly, her attention fixed on the trio, who had arrived separately but now hovered near the bar, their body language betraying a fragile alliance. Duval, impeccably dressed in a cream linen suit, moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to command. His dark eyes scanned the room, lingering on each guest as if weighing their worth or their threat. Celeste Warrington, in a flowing emerald gown that hugged her slender frame, stood apart, her auburn hair catching the light as she toyed with a jade bracelet. Her expression was guarded, her lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced toward Roger Blake. Roger, leaning against the bar with a glass of dark rum in hand, looked like a storm cloud in human form, his rugged features set in a scowl, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the polished wood. Miss Marple noted the tension between them, a silent current of mistrust that pulsed beneath their polite nods and forced smiles. Her rumor had done its work, sowing seeds of doubt that now bloomed in their sit-along glances and clipped words. She caught snatches of their conversation as she drifted closer, her step slow and deliberate, her knitting bag slung over one shoulder as if it were merely a prop. "Heard she found something," Celeste murmured, her voice low but sharp. "That old woman's been poking around too much." Roger's jaw tightened. "She's a busybody, nothing more. But if she's got a lead on it..." "Enough," Mr. Duval cut in, his tone smooth but edged with warning. "We stick to the plan. No one moves until we're certain." Miss Marple tilted her head, feigning interest in a nearby hibiscus bloom, but her ears were attuned to every word. That they spoke of was undoubtedly the sapphire star, and their agitation confirmed her suspicion. The necklace was not just a myth but a tangible prize they all coveted. She moved away, satisfied that her bait had hooked them, and joined a cluster of guests sampling spiced rum infused with cinnamon and clove. The warmth of the liquor spread through her, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. As the evening progressed, the rum-tasting event grew livelier, the guests' laughter rising over the music. Miss Marple circulated, her gentle demeanor disarming those she spoke with. She chatted with a retired professor about the island's volcanic history, complimented a young couple on their matching straw hats, and listened patiently as a tipsy socialite recounted her latest shopping spree in Barbados. All the while, her eyes tracked the trio, noting how they gravitated toward one another, then pulled apart like planets caught in a fraught orbit. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she saw Roger slip away from the pavilion, his movements furtive, as he headed toward the beach path. Miss Marple excused herself from a conversation about local bird life and followed, her steps light despite the sand that clung to her sensible shoes. The path wound through a grove of coconut palms, their fronds rustling in the night breeze. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the dunes, and Miss Marple kept to the shadows, her heart quickening with the thrill of pursuit. Roger's silhouette was unmistakable ahead, his broad shoulders hunched as he moved toward a secluded cove where the cliffs met the sea. Miss Marple paused behind a cluster of sea grapes, her breath steady as she watched him kneel in the sand, his hands digging with frantic purpose. He was searching for something, likely the sapphire star, spurred by her rumor. She noted the way his head snapped up at every sound, his paranoia a testament to the cracks in his composure. Before she could move closer, a second figure emerged. From the darkness, Celeste, her emerald gown shimmering like scales in the moonlight. She strode toward Roger, her voice sharp enough to cut through the waves' gentle roar. "You're out here alone," she hissed, her hands on her hips. "After everything we agreed on?" Roger stood, brushing sand from his trousers, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. "You think I trust you? Or Duval? That old bat's got you both spooked, and I'm not waiting for her to ruin everything." Celeste stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "You're the one ruining it, Roger. If you'd stuck to the plan instead of chasing ghosts." "Ghosts?" he snapped, his voice rising. "That necklace is real, and you know it. Your family's been bleeding me dry for years over it. I'm done with your debts." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. The pieces were falling into place. Celeste's family, the Warringtons, had once owned the resort, and their fall from grace was tied to the Sapphire Star's theft. Roger's mention of debts suggested a financial entanglement, perhaps blackmail or a promise unfulfilled. And Mr. Duval, with his father's smuggling past, was the linchpin. His control of the resort a motive for reclaiming the necklace's value. She was about to retreat when a twig snapped under her foot. The sound sharp in the quiet cove. Roger and Celeste froze, their heads turning toward the shadows. Miss Marple held her breath, her body still as she pressed against the sea grapes. For a moment, the only sound was the waves, relentless and rhythmic. Then Celeste spoke, her voice low and urgent. "Someone's here," she whispered. "We need to go. Now." Roger hesitated, his eyes scanning the darkness, but Celeste grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the path. They vanished into the night, their footsteps fading into the sand. Miss Marple exhaled, her pulse steady despite the close call. She stepped into the cove, her eyes sweeping the spot where Roger had been digging. The sand was disturbed, a shallow trench revealing nothing but shells and seaweed. Whatever he sought was still hidden, but his desperation was a clue in itself. She returned to the pavilion, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The rum-tasting event was winding down, the guests dispersing to their villas or the beachside bonfire. Mr. Duval stood near the bar, his charm restored as he bid good-night to a group of tourists. But Miss Marple caught the flicker of unease in his eyes as he glanced toward the path, where Roger and Celeste had gone. He knew something was amiss, and her rumor had set him on edge. She approached the bar, her smile as disarming as ever. "Mr. Duval, what a splendid evening," she said, her voice warm. "This rum tasting has been the highlight of my stay. Tell me, do you source these spirits locally?" He blinked, caught off guard by her genial tone. "Why, yes, Miss Marple," he replied, recovering quickly. "Most are distilled right here on the island. Would you like another sample? The coconut rum is a favorite." "Oh, I've had quite enough," she said, patting her knitting bag. "But I must say, the island's history adds such flavor to the experience. All these tales of hidden treasures and old secrets, it's positively thrilling." His smile tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Just stories, I'm afraid. The island's charm lies in its present, not its past." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Though I did hear a curious rumor today, something about a clue to that old Sapphire Star. Silly gossip, I suppose, but it does make one wonder." Mr. Duval's hand paused on the bar, his fingers tightening around a glass. "Gossip can be dangerous, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "It stirs up trouble where there's none." "Oh, I'm sure you're right," she replied, her tone airy. "I'll stick to my knitting and leave the rumors to the wind." She excused herself, her heart light with satisfaction. The seed of distrust she'd planted had taken root, and the trio's alliance was fraying. Roger's reckless search, Celeste's accusations, and Mr. Duval's guarded response all pointed to a shared goal now threatened by mutual suspicion. Miss Marple returned to her villa, the night air cool against her skin as she sat to jot notes in her small leather-bound journal. "The Sapphire Star," she wrote, "is more than a prize, it's a symbol of betrayal. Celeste's family lost the resort, likely due to her uncle's role in the necklace's theft. Roger's death suggests he's entangled in their past, perhaps as a victim or accomplice. Mr. Duval, with his father's smuggling legacy, sees the necklace as a means to secure his future or erase his shame. Their vendetta is not just against each other but against the resort itself, a monument to their grievances. She paused, her pen hovering over the page. The next step was clear. She needed to push their distrust further, to force a mistake that would expose their plan. The charity auction tomorrow, hosted by Lady Evelyn, offered the perfect stage. Miss Marple had already planned to donate a replica of the sapphire star, a clever forgery she'd commissioned from a local jeweler, its blue glass convincing enough to fool an eager eye. The auction would be her trap, a chance to see how far the trio would go to claim their prize. She closed her journal, her mind alight with the thrill of the chase. The rum-tasting event had been a success, not for its spirits but for the clarity it brought. Roger's impulsive search, Celeste's anger, and Mr. Duval's unease were threads in her tapestry, and she was weaving them toward a conclusion. As she settled into bed, the distant sound of waves lulling her to sleep, Miss Marple felt a quiet contentment. The sapphire star was within her grasp not as a treasure, but as the key to justice. The next morning dawned bright, the sky a canvas of cerulean unbroken by clouds. Miss Marple rose early, her routine as precise as ever. A cup of Earl Grey, a slice of mango, and a quick review of her notes. She dressed in a crisp white blouse and a skirt of soft coral, her straw hat tilted to shade her eyes. The charity auction was set for the afternoon, but she had one task before then: to ensure her replica necklace was ready. She met the jeweler, a weary man named Mr. Toussaint, in a quiet corner of the resort's marketplace. His stall was a riot of color, beads and shells glinting in the sunlight, but he led her to a back room where the necklace lay on a velvet cloth. The fox sapphire caught the light, its facets sparkling with deceptive brilliance. Miss Marple examined it closely, her fingers tracing the delicate silver setting. "It's perfect," she said, her voice warm with approval. "You've outdone yourself, Mr. Toussaint." He grinned, his teeth flashing white against his dark skin. "Anything for you, Miss Marple. You sure this'll fool them?" "Oh, I'm quite certain," she replied, tucking the necklace into her knitting bag. "It's not the stone they'll see, but the promise of what it represents." She paid him generously, adding a tip for his discretion, and returned to the resort. The marketplace buzzed with activity, vendors hawking spices and woven baskets. But Miss Marple's thoughts were on the auction. She envisioned the trio's reactions: Roger's impulsive bidding, Celeste's calculated restraint, Mr. Duval's attempt to control the outcome. Each move would reveal more of their motives, and she was ready to watch them unravel. By noon, the resort was abuzz with anticipation for the auction. Guests gathered in the grand ballroom, its ceiling painted with murals of tropical birds, its tables laden with donated items: a hand-carved chess set, a pearl bracelet, a painting of the island's pittance. Miss Marple slipped her replica necklace into the auction's inventory, labeled simply as Sapphire Star Replica donated by Miss J. Marple. She watched as the auctioneer, a jovial man with a booming voice, added it to the display, its sparkle drawing gasps from the crowd. Lady Evelyn, resplendent in a turquoise caftan, greeted Miss Marple with a warm embrace. "Jane, you've outdone yourself with this donation," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It's causing quite a stir. I do hope it raises a good sum for the Children's Fund." Miss Marple replied, her tone demure. "It's such a lovely piece, even if it's only glass." Lady Evelyn chuckled, unaware of the trap being set. "You're too modest, my dear. Now, come, let's find you a seat." Miss Marple chose a chair near the back, her knitting bag at her feet, and watched as the ballroom filled. The trio arrived, their entrances staggered but their purpose clear. Roger slouched in a corner, his eyes fixed on the necklace. Celeste sat near the front, her posture rigid, her jade bracelet glinting as she adjusted her scarf. Mr. Duval hovered near the auctioneer, his smile practiced but his hands restless. The auction began with a flurry of bids, the chess set fetching a tidy sum, the painting sparking a lively contest. Miss Marple waited, her needles clicking softly, until the auctioneer lifted the replica sapphire star, its blue glow catching every eye. Ladies and gentlemen, a stunning replica of the legendary sapphire star, donated by our esteemed guest, Miss Jane Marple, he announced. Let's start the bidding at $500. Roger's hand shot up, his bid swift and aggressive. 600. Celeste countered, her voice cool. 700. Miss Marple noted the glances they exchanged, sharp as daggers. Mr. Duval leaned toward the auctioneer, whispering something, but the bids climbed higher. 800. 900. 1,000. The room buzzed with excitement, unaware of the deeper stakes. Miss Marple's rumor had worked its magic, drawing the trio into a public contest where their greed would betray them. As the bids reached 1,500, Mr. Duval raised his hand, his voice steady. 2,000. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Celeste's lips parted, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't bid again. Roger, his face flushed, called out, 2,500. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with surprise but with satisfaction. Their desperation was palpable. Each bid a crack in their alliance. She leaned forward, her eyes darting. Between them, waiting for the moment one would break, the auctioneer's gavel hovered, his voice rising. 2,500. Goin' once, goin' twice. 3,000. Celeste's voice cut through, sharp and defiant. Roger's head snapped toward her, his fists clenching. Mr. Duval's smile faltered, his eyes darting to the necklace, as if willing it to reveal its secrets. The room erupted in applause, but Miss Marple saw only the trio, their masks slipping as greed and distrust collided. The gavel fell, sold to Miss Warrington for $3,000. Celeste stood, her face pale but triumphant, as she approached the auctioneer to claim her prize. Roger stormed out, his footsteps heavy on the polished floor. Mr. Duval lingered, his expression unreadable, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes. The replica had done its work, stirring their suspicions and setting them against each other. As the auction continued, Miss Marple slipped away, her knitting bag secure. She paused on the veranda, the night air cool against her skin, and allowed herself a small smile. The sapphire star, real or not, had become her weapon, and tonight it had struck true. The trio's alliance was fracturing, their secrets spilling like sand through their fingers. Tomorrow, at the cliffside hike, she would tighten the net, drawing them closer to their own undoing. She retired to her villa, the stars bright above, and added a final note to her journal. The bait is set, and the trap is sprung. Their greed will be their downfall, and I shall be there to see it. Chapter 10. Tangles of Trust. Morning sun draped Coconut Cove Resort in a golden haze, its rays glinting off the turquoise sea like scattered coins. Miss Jane Marple sat at a wicker table on the veranda, her chamomile tea steaming gently in a porcelain cup. Her knitting lay untouched beside her, a deliberate choice. She needed her wits sharp today. The air carried the tang of salt and frangipani, but beneath the idyllic veneer, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. Last night's rum-tasting event had worked its magic, just as she'd planned, by spreading a rumor through Amos, the groundskeeper, that she'd stumbled upon a clue to the sapphire star's whereabouts. She'd set the trio Mr. Duval, Celeste Warrington, and Roger Blake on edge. Their nervous glances and whispered arguments had confirmed her suspicions. The vendetta was unraveling, and today, at Lady Evelyn Harcourt's charity auction, she would tighten the noose. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her pale blue eyes scanning the veranda. Guests milled about, their laughter bright but brittle, as if they sensed the undercurrent of unease. The auction was the talk of the resort, a grand affair to raise funds for a local marine conservation group. Lady Evelyn, ever the gracious host, had spared no expense. The ballroom was to be transformed with silk draperies, crystal chandeliers, and tables laden with tropical orchids. But Miss Marple's focus wasn't on the decor. She donated a replica of the sapphire star necklace to the auction, a clever ruse crafted with Amos's help. The piece, a convincing fake made of sea glass and silver, was designed to draw out the trio's greed. If her instincts were correct, and they rarely failed her, their bids would reveal more than their wallets. The ballroom buzzed with anticipation as guests filed in, their evening attire shimmering under the chandeliers. Miss Marple, dressed in a simple lavender frock with a pearl brooch, blended into the crowd, her unassuming presence her greatest asset. She took a seat near the back, her knitting bag at her feet, though her hands remained free to observe. The stage was set with a polished mahogany podium, where Lady Evelyn stood, radiant in a coral gown, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She welcomed the guests with a warm smile, her voice carrying the practiced charm of a seasoned hostess. Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Evelyn began, tonight, we gather not only to enjoy the splendor of Coconut Cove, but to support the preservation of our island's precious reefs. Your generosity will ensure St. Lucia's beauty endures for generations. The crowd applauded, and Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the trio. Mr. Duval, the hotelier, stood near the bar, his tailored suit impeccable but his posture stiff, as if bracing for a storm. Celeste Warrington, the heiress, sat at a front table, her emerald dress catching the light, her fingers drumming restlessly on a champagne flute. Roger Blake, the brooding expat, lingered by a side exit, his dark eyes darting between the stage and the crowd. Miss Marple noted their positions, her mind mapping their movements like pieces on a chessboard. The auction began with a flurry of bids, paintings, rare books, and a private yacht tour all fetched handsome sums. Miss Marple watched patiently, her calm demeanor masking the thrill of the hunt, when the auctioneer, a jovial man with a thick island accent, announced the sapphire star replica. A hush fell over the room. He held up the necklace, its blue stones glinting under the spotlight, and Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her heart quickening. This exquisite piece, the auctioneer said, crafted to honor the legendary sapphire star, is a one-of-a-kind donation from our dear guest, Miss Jane Marple. Bidding starts at $500. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Celeste, whose lips parted in a barely concealed gasp. Roger's hand twitched, as if resisting the urge to bid. Mr. Duval, however, raised his paddle first, his voice steady but laced with urgency. 600. 700. Celeste countered, her voice sharp, drawing curious glances. Miss Marple tilted her head, noting the heiress's clenched jaw. The bait was working. Roger hesitated, then raised his paddle. 800. His tone was low, almost reluctant, but his eyes burned with intent. The crowd stirred, sensing a rivalry. Miss Marple suppressed a smile. The trio's greed was pulling them into the open. Just as she'd hoped, the bids climbed rapidly. 900, 1,000, 1,200. Guests whispered, intrigued by the fervor over a mere replica. Lady Evelyn, standing to the side, caught Miss Marple's eye and raised a curious eyebrow. Miss Marple gave a slight nod, her expression serene. The auctioneer, delighted by the escalation, egged them on. "Do I hear 1,500? 2,000? Mr. Duval snapped. His face flushed. Celeste shot him a venomous look, her paddle trembling in her hand. 2,500, she retorted, her voice icy. Roger, caught in the crossfire, bid 3,000. His knuckles white around the paddle. Miss Marple leaned back, her fingers brushing the edge of her teacup. The trio's desperation was palpable. Each bid a crack in their fragile alliance. She'd anticipated their hunger for the sapphire star, but this fervor suggested more of fear, perhaps, that the others might claim it first. The room buzzed with excitement, guests craning their necks to watch the drama unfold. 5,000, Mr. Duval barked, standing now, his composure fraying. A gasp swept the room. Celeste's face paled, her paddle dropping to her lap. Roger shook his head, muttering something under his breath, and withdrew from the bidding. The auctioneer, barely containing his glee, called out, 5,000 goin' once, goin' twice sold to Mr. Duval. The crowd erupted in applause, but Miss Marple's focus remained on the trio. Mr. Duval strode to the stage to claim his prize, his smile tight. Celeste's eyes followed him, her expression a mix of fury and betrayal. Roger slipped toward the exit, his shoulders hunched. Miss Marple made a mental note. The necklace had stirred something deeper than greed-distrust. As the auction continued, Miss Marple excused herself and slipped into the corridor, her steps light but purposeful. She needed a moment to assess the trio's reactions up close. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant hum of the ballroom. She paused near a potted palm, her ears tuned for familiar voices. Sure enough, Mr. Duval's clipped tones echoed from a nearby alcove. "You think you can outmaneuver me, Celeste," he hissed. "That necklace is mine. It's a fake, you fool." Celeste shot back, her voice low but venomous. "You've just thrown away thousands for nothing. Then why did you bid?" Mr. Duval's voice dripped with suspicion. "You know something, don't you?" Miss Marple pressed closer to the wall, her heart steady despite the thrill. Their words confirmed her theory. They believed the real sapphire star was within reach, and the fake had exposed their fractured trust. She heard footsteps. Roger's, she guessed, from the heavy tread. "Enough," he growled. "You're both idiots. That old woman's playing us." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Roger was sharper than she'd given him credit for, but not sharp enough. She retreated silently, returning to the ballroom just as the auctioneer announced the final item. Lady Evelyn caught her arm, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Jane, that necklace caused quite a stir. Care to share your secret?" "In time, Evelyn," Miss Marple murmured, patting her friend's hand. "Let's just say the fish are biting." The evening wound down with a champagne toast, but the trio's tension lingered like a storm cloud. Miss Marple lingered near the bar, her teacup replaced with a glass of sparkling water for appearances. She watched Mr. Duval clutch the velvet box containing the fake necklace, his fingers tracing its edges as if willing it to be real. Celeste stood across the room, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. Roger had vanished, likely licking his wounds or plotting his next move. Miss Marple approached Mr. Duval, her smile disarming. "Congratulations, Mr. Duval. Quite a prize you've won." He startled, his grip tightening on the box. "Thank you, Miss Marple. It's sentimental." "Oh, I'm sure," she said, her tone light. It's remarkable how a piece of jewelry can stir such passion, almost as if it holds secrets. His eyes narrowed, but he forced a laugh. Just a replica. As you said, nothing more. Of course, she replied, her gaze steady. Though replicas can be so convincing, can't they? One might mistake them for the real thing. She excused herself before he could respond, her heart humming with satisfaction. The seed of doubt was planted. She found Celeste next, standing alone by a window overlooking the moonlit sea. Miss Warrington, you seemed quite taken with the necklace, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. A shame you didn't win it. Celeste's smile was tight. It's just a trinket. I got carried away. Easily done, Miss Marple said, tilting her head, especially when something reminds us of family history. Celeste's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Turning back to the window, Miss Marple didn't press further. She'd seen enough. The heiress was rattled, her composure a thin veneer. As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple retired to her room, the night's events swirling in her mind. She sat at her desk, her knitting bag open, and pulled out a small notebook. In her neat, precise handwriting, she jotted down the evening's observations. Mr. Duval's reckless bid, Celeste's accusation of sabotage, Roger's suspicion of her own role. The trio's alliance was crumbling, their greed and mistrust turning them against each other. The fake necklace had done its job, exposing their plan to sell the real sapphire star, which she was certain lay hidden somewhere on the island. She paused, her pen hovering over the page. The sapphire star wasn't just a jewel, it was a symbol of betrayal, tying the trio to a decades-old scandal. Mr. Duval's father, jailed for smuggling. Celeste's family, stripped of their resort empire. Roger, the wild card, likely a hired hand with his own stake in the prize. The vendetta wasn't just about wealth. It was personal, a reckoning for past wrongs. Miss Marple closed her notebook and leaned back, her gaze drifting to the moonlit balcony. The night was still, the only sound the distant crash of waves. She sipped her chamomile tea, its warmth soothing her nerves. The auction had been a gamble, but it had paid off. The trio's desperation had revealed their cracks, and she was one step closer to unmasking their scheme. Tomorrow, she'd organize a hike to the cliffs, where she suspected the real sapphire star was hidden. The trio would follow, lured by her rumor, and she'd be ready. She smiled softly, setting her cup down. The game was afoot, and Miss Jane Marple was in her element. The next morning dawned bright, the resort buzzing with the promise of a new day. Miss Marple joined Lady Evelyn for breakfast, her demeanor as serene as ever. "Jane, you're positively glowing," Lady Evelyn said, buttering a scone. "That auction was a triumph, wasn't it?" "Quite," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. "Though I suspect the real excitement is yet to come." She excused herself to meet Amos, who waited by the garden gate, his straw hat tilted against the sun. "Miss Marple, you stir up more trouble than a hurricane," he said, grinning. "That necklace got 'em all riled up." "Good," she said, patting his arm. "Now, Amos, let's talk about that hike to the cliffs. I have a feeling our friends will be eager to join." As they planned, Miss Marple's mind was already on the next move. The sapphire star was close, she could feel it. And with the trio's trust in tatters, she was ready to pull the final thread. Chapter 11. The cliffside confrontation. Morning sun burned fiercely over St. Lucia, gilding the cliffs of Coconut Cove Resort in a blaze of gold. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the resort's infinity pool, her straw hat shielding her eyes as she surveyed the rugged coastline. The sea churned below, its waves clawing at the rocks, while above, the Pitons loomed like silent judges. Her cotton dress fluttered in the breeze, and her knitting bag hung lightly on her shoulder, its contents more than mere wool and needles today. She had orchestrated this moment with the precision of a chess master, and the board was set for a confrontation. The past week had woven a tapestry of clues, each thread tightening around the trio Marcel Duval, Celeste Warrington, and Roger Blake, whose vendetta over the long-lost sapphire star necklace pulsed beneath the resort's idyllic surface. Miss Marple's rumor spread through the groundskeeper. Amos had worked like a charm, a whispered hint that she'd uncovered the necklace's hiding place. Now, she'd organized a group hike to the cliffs, certain the trio would follow. Drawn by greed and desperation, the key she'd plucked from Celeste's dropped clutch last night, a small brass thing etched with a palm tree, burned in her mind. It was the key to a safe, she was sure, and the safe held the truth. The hike was billed as a nature tour, led by Amos, whose knowledge of the island's flora and fauna masked his role as Miss Marple's ally. A dozen guests gathered at the trailhead, their chatter bright against the rustle of palm fronds. Evelyn Harcourt, resplendent in a coral sarong, waved to Miss Marple. "Jane, you're a marvel for joining us. These cliffs are spectacular, but mind your step, the path's a bit wild." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the group. "I wouldn't miss it, Evelyn. A brisk walk sharpens the mind." There they were, Duval, in a crisp linen shirt, his charm a polished veneer, Celeste, her platinum hair tied back, her gaze darting like a trapped bird's, Roger, trailing at the group's edge, his weathered face set in a scowl. Their presence confirmed her bait had hooked them. Amos led the way, his voice carrying over the crunch of gravel. "These cliffs got history, folks. Pirates used them for lookouts, hid their loot in caves below. Keep an eye out for frigate birds, big red throats, like balloons." The guests laughed, snapping photos, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Miss Marple lagged slightly, letting the trio pass her, their tension palpable. Duval's hand brushed Celeste's arm, a gesture she rebuffed with a sharp turn of her head. Roger's eyes flicked to the cliff's edge, as if mapping an escape. The trail wound upward, flanked by wild orchids and tamarind trees, the air thick with salt and earth. Miss Marple's sensible shoes gripped the path, her pace steady despite her age. She noted the trio's hushed exchange, their words lost to the wind but their urgency clear. At a lookout point, Amos paused to point out a distant reef. "That's Marigo's teeth, sharp as knives. Smugglers used to run their boats aground there, back when the Sapphire Star went missin'." Miss Marple caught Celeste's flinch, Duval's tightened jaw, Roger's quick glance at the sea. The Sapphire Star was their obsession, a cursed necklace stolen decades ago, its legend entwined with their family's pasts. She'd pieced it together. Duval's father, a smuggler jailed for the theft, Celeste's uncle, disgraced and bankrupted, Roger, a drifter tied to their shared history. Perhaps a betrayed accomplice. Their vendetta wasn't just for the necklaces. Value, it was personal, a reckoning for old wounds. The group pressed on, the trail narrowing as it hugged the cliff's edge. Below, waves crashed against jagged rocks, their spray catching the light like shattered glass. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not from fear but anticipation. She'd chosen this spot for its isolation, its drama. The trio's nerves were fraying, she could see it in their restless movements, the way they lagged behind the group, their heads bent in conspiracy. Amos halted at a rocky outcrop, gesturing to a crevice where ferns spilled like green lace. "This here's Smuggler's Notch. Folks say there's a cave down there, hidden by tides, perfect for hidden treasure. His eyes met Miss Marple's, a flicker of understanding. She nodded slightly, her signal to press the trap. She stepped forward, her voice clear and deliberate. How fascinating, Amos. I heard a rumor about a treasure up here, too. Something about a sapphire necklace, hidden in a safe somewhere on these cliffs. She let the words hang, watching the trio freeze. Duval's smile faltered. Celeste's hand clenched. Roger's eyes narrowed. The other guests murmured, intrigued. But Miss Marple's focus was on her quarry. Jane, you and your stories. Evelyn laughed, oblivious. You'll have us all hunting for pirate gold. Oh, I'm sure it's just a tale, Miss Marple said, her tone light but her eyes locked on Celeste. Though I did find something curious, a key, etched with a palm tree. I wonder what it opens. Celeste's face paled, her hand instinctively touching her pocket. Duval shot her a warning glance, but Roger broke the silence, his voice rough. You're meddling in things you don't understand, old lady. The group gasped, and Amos stepped forward, his tone firm. Easy, Mr. Blake. Miss Marple's just mackin' conversation. Miss Marple raised a hand, unruffled. No offense taken, Amos. Curiosity is my vice, Mr. Blake. And these cliffs do spark the imagination, don't they? The hike resumed, but the trio's composure was unraveling. Miss Marple lagged again, letting them pull ahead, their whispers now frantic. She caught fragments. The safe, she knows. We can't wait. At a fork in the trail, where a narrow path veered toward a secluded ledge, Roger broke away, gesturing for Duval and Celeste to follow. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment to spring her trap. She signaled Amos with a subtle nod, and he announced a break. Folks, let's rest here. Got some water and fruit in my pack. Mind the edge, it's a long drop. The guests spread out, some snapping photos, others sipping from canteens. Miss Marple slipped toward the narrow path, her movements silent, her knitting bag a comforting weight. The ledge was a crescent of stone, fringed by sea grape and overlooking a dizzying drop to the ocean. Roger stood at its center, a crumpled map in his hands, his voice low and furious. You said the safe was here. Duval, where is it? Duval's charm was gone, his face taut. It's hidden, you fool, behind the boulder. But we can't move it with her sniffing around. Celeste's voice was a hiss. She has my key. How did she get it? You were supposed to watch her. Miss Marple stepped into view, her presence startling them like a thunderclap. I'm afraid I'm rather good at noticing things, Miss Warrington. Like a key dropped in haste, or three people bound by a vendetta they can't escape. Roger lunged forward, his face twisted. You've got no business here. He grabbed Duval's arm, shoving him toward the boulder, a massive slab half buried in the cliff. The movement was reckless, and Duval stumbled, his foot slipping on loose gravel. He teetered at the ledge's edge, arms flailing, the sea roaring. Below, Miss Marple's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. Mr. Blake, stop this at once. You'll do more harm than good. Roger froze, his breath ragged, as Duval regained his balance, clutching a sea grape branch. Celeste's eyes were wide, her hands trembling. You don't understand, she whispered. It's not just the necklace. It's what it cost us, our families, our lives. Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze steady. I understand more than you think. The sapphire star ruined your uncle, Miss Warrington. It sent Mr. Duval's father to prison. And you, Mr. Blake, were you betrayed by them? Left to carry the shame? She paused, letting her words sink in. But this vendetta, this plan to steal it back and sell it, it ends here. Let's have no accidents on these cliffs. Duval's face was ashen, his charm shattered. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not yet, Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. But I have the key, and I suspect I know where it leads. Shall we find out together? Or would you prefer the police? The trio exchanged glances, their alliance fracturing. Under her scrutiny, Roger's shoulders slumped, Celeste's lips quivered, and Duval's hands clenched into fists. Before they could respond, Amos's voice rang out from the trail. Miss Marple, you okay down there? She turned, her smile serene. Quite fine, Amos. Just enjoying the view. Perhaps our friends here could use some water. Amos appeared, his presence a quiet threat, and the trio backed away from the ledge. The other guests were out of sight, their laughter faint. Miss Marple slipped the key into her knitting bag, its weight a promise of answers. She led the way back to the main trail, her heart steady, her mind alight with the next move. The hike continued, the guests none the wiser, but the trio's silence was heavy, their eyes avoiding hers. At the trail's end, Evelyn greeted them with iced tea and a radiant smile. Jane, you survived. Any treasures found? Only the beauty of the island, Miss Marple replied, her eyes flicking to the trio, who dispersed quickly into the crowd. She sipped her tea, the key a secret talisman in her bag. The confrontation had exposed their desperation, their fragile trust. The safe, hidden somewhere on these cliffs, held the sapphire star and the truth of their vendetta. As the group returned to the resort, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze on the cliffs. The sun was dipping, casting long shadows, and the sea whispered its secrets. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the puzzle's pieces aligning. Tomorrow, she would find the safe, test the key, and unravel the trio's plan. For now, she rejoined Evelyn, her knitting bag at her side, content that the cliffside confrontation had set the stage for justice. Chapter 12. The safe secret air in Miss Jane Marple's suite at Coconut Cove Resort was heavy with the scent of jasmine and salt. The balcony doors flung wide to admit the Caribbean breeze. The night was a velvet curtain studded with stars, and the sea below whispered secrets against the cliffs. Miss Marple sat in a wicker chair, her knitting needles idle, the brass key etched with a palm tree resting on the table beside her. It gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a small but potent trophy from the cliffside confrontation earlier that day. Her heart beat steadily, her mind a whirl of connections as she pieced together the final threads of the vendetta that bound Marcel, Duval, Celeste Warrington, and Roger Blake. The hike had been a triumph, exposing the trio's desperation over the sapphire star, a cursed necklace stolen decades ago, its legend entwined with their family's ruin. Miss Marple had baited them with a rumor of its location, and their reckless pursuit had led to Roger nearly Duval over the cliff's edge. The key, dropped by Celeste in the chaos, was her prize, a clue to a safe that she believed held the necklace and evidence of their illicit plan to sell it. Now, under the cover of night, she would test her theory, slipping into Duval's office to uncover the truth. She rose, smoothing her lavender cotton dress, and tucked the key into her knitting bag, its weight a quiet reassurance. The resort was alive with the hum of a steel drum band, the nightly revelry drawing guests to the sunset terrace. It was the perfect distraction. Miss Marple adjusted her straw hat, unnecessary at this hour but a comforting habit, and stepped into the corridor, her sensible shoes silent on the tiled floor. The resort's administrative wing was a low building tucked behind a grove of sea grape, its windows dark except for a faint glow from Duval's office. Miss Marple had scouted it earlier, noting the single lock on the door and the absence of guards. Duval relied on his charm and the resort's laid-back atmosphere to deter suspicion. But she was not so easily swayed. She moved through the shadows, her movements deliberate, her senses sharp despite her 74 years. At the office door, she paused, listening for footsteps. The distant thrum of music and laughter reassured her. She drew the key from her bag, its palm tree etching catching the moonlight. The lock clicked smoothly, and the door swung inward, revealing a room of polished mahogany and nautical decor. A desk dominated the space, flanked by filing cabinets and a painting of a schooner under sail. Miss Marple's eyes settled on a small safe in the corner, its brass lock gleaming like a challenge. She knelt, her knees protesting faintly, and inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying clunk, and the safe door opened to reveal a velvet pouch and a sheaf of documents. Her pulse quickened as she drew out the pouch, its weight promising something extraordinary. Inside was the sapphire star necklace of deep blue gems, the central stone large as a gull's egg, its facets catching the dim light like a trapped galaxy. She held it briefly, its beauty marred by the curse it carried, then returned it to the pouch. The documents were more telling, a contract for an offshore sail, listing a buyer in Antigua and a price in the millions, emails between Duval, Celeste, and Roger, detailing their plan to split the proceeds, and a faded photograph of 3 men: Duval's father, Celeste's uncle, and a younger man who could be Roger's kin standing on a dock, with the sapphire star round a woman's neck. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The vendetta was clear now, a pact to reclaim what their families had lost. Driven by greed and old grudges, a floorboard creaked behind her, and she froze, her hand still on the documents. The door was ajar, and a shadow moved in the hallway. She slipped the pouch and papers into her knitting bag, closed the safe, and stood, her heart steady despite the danger. The shadow resolved into Celeste Warrington, her platinum hair loose, her blue sundress ghostly in the moonlight. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as she saw Miss Marple. "You?" Celeste hissed, stepping inside and closing the door. "I knew you were trouble. What are you doing here?" Miss Marple's voice was calm, her tone that of a kindly aunt. "I might ask you the same, Miss Warrington. Looking for something you lost, perhaps." Celeste's hand trembled, but her voice was steel. "You have my key, and now you've seen too much." Miss Marple tilted her head, unfazed. "I've seen a great deal. Yes, a necklace that ruined your uncle, a plan that binds you to Mr. Duval and Mr. Blake, a vendetta that's cost you more than you admit. But it's not too late to stop this." Celeste laughed, a brittle sound. "Stop. You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to live in the shadow of a scandal. My uncle died penniless because of that necklace. Duval's father rotted in jail. Roger's brother, well, you wouldn't understand. We're taking back what's ours." Miss Marple stepped closer, her eyes soft but piercing. "And what will it cost you, Celeste?" "Your freedom, your conscience. I heard you on the cliffs today. You're not as certain as you pretend. There's regret in you, and it's eating you alive." Celeste's face crumpled, her defiance wavering. "You don't know me." "I know people," Miss Marple said, gently, "and I know a heart that's not as hard as it seems. Tell me, why come here tonight? To protect the necklace, or to escape it?" Before Celeste could answer, a shout echoed from the hallway. "Celeste, where are you?" It was Duval, his voice sharp with panic. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her knitting bag, the evidence secure. Celeste hesitated, her eyes darting to the door, then back to Miss Marple. "Help me," Celeste whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want it to go this far." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "Then stay quiet and follow my lead." She moved to the desk, arranging herself as if studying a guest ledger, her knitting bag at her feet. Duval burst in, his cream suit rumpled, his face flushed. "What's this?" he demanded, glaring at Miss Marple. "Snooping in my office?" "Hardly, Mr. Duval," she replied, her tone mild. "I was looking for a lost earring and thought it might have been swept up here. Miss Warrington was kind enough to help me search." Duval's eyes narrowed, but Celeste nodded, her voice unsteady. "Yes, I heard her in the hall and came to assist." Miss Marple smiled, her calm a shield. "No luck, I'm afraid, but I'll leave you to your evening. Good night." She moved toward the door, her knitting bag swinging lightly, but Duval blocked her path. "Not so fast," he said, his charm gone. "What's in that bag?" Her heart skipped, but her face remained serene. "Just my knitting, Mr. Duval. Would you like to see my scarf in progress?" Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Everything all right here?" Amos stood in the doorway, his broad frame filling the space, his eyes sharp. Miss Marple had tipped him off before the hike, asking him to keep watch tonight. His presence was her ace. "Quite all right, Amos," she said, stepping past Duval. "Just a misunderstanding. Shall we head back to the terrace?" Duval hesitated, then stepped aside, his jaw tight. Celeste followed, her eyes downcast, and Amos brought up the rear, his presence a quiet warning. As they reached the lobby, Miss Marple slipped Amos a note, her handwriting precise. "Call Inspector Dubois. Safe in Duval's office. Evidence secured." The terrace was a riot of color and sound. Guests swaying to the steel drums, their glasses glinting under fairy lights. Miss Marple rejoined Lady Evelyn, who was deep in conversation with a botanist about rare orchids. "Jane, you're back. Where did you wander off to?" "Just stretching my legs," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "This island does keep one busy." Evelyn laughed, but her eyes were curious. "You've got that look, Jane, like you're unraveling one of your village mysteries." Miss Marple sipped her guava juice, her smile enigmatic. "Perhaps, Evelyn, but mysteries, like good tea, need time to steep." Across the terrace, Duval and Celeste stood apart, their faces strained. Roger was absent, likely licking his wounds. After the cliffside debacle, Miss Marple's mind turned to the documents in her bag, the contract, the emails, the photograph. They painted a clear picture, a plan to sell the sapphire star to an Antiguan buyer, a scheme rooted in decades-old betrayals. Duval's father had been jailed for smuggling the necklace. Celeste's uncle had lost his fortune in the scandal. Roger's brother, perhaps a forgotten accomplice, had died in obscurity. Their vendetta was a pact to reclaim their legacy. But greed had twisted it into something darker. As the band struck up a lively calypso, Miss Marple excused herself, retreating to a quiet corner of the terrace. She drew the documents from her bag, scanning them under the glow of a lantern. The emails revealed a timeline. Duval had located the safe years ago, hidden in the cliffs by his father. Celeste had financed the operation, her wealth a key to their plan. Roger, the muscle, had scouted the caves, but cracks had formed. Celeste's doubts, Roger's temper, Duval's arrogance. Miss Marple's confrontation had widened those cracks, and Celeste's plea in the office was proof. Footsteps approached, and she tucked the papers away. It was Amos, his face grim. "Inspector's on his way, Miss Marple," said. "He'll be discreet, but he wants to see the safe tonight." "Well done, Amos," she said, her voice low. "Keep an eye on Mr. Duval. He's cornered, and cornered men are dangerous." Amos nodded, melting back into the crowd. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on a scarf, the rhythm calming her. The sapphire star was secure, the evidence damning, but she knew the game wasn't over. Duval might try to destroy the safe's contents, Roger might flee, Celeste's remorse might not hold. She needed to stay one step ahead. The night wore on, the terrace emptying as guests drifted to their villas. Miss Marple lingered, watching Duval and Celeste from a distance. They stood by the bar, their conversation heated but hushed. She caught fragments. The buyer, too late, she knows. Their alliance was crumbling, and she felt a quiet satisfaction. The truth was close, and she would see it through. A black sedan pulled into the resort's drive. Its lights dimmed. Inspector Dubois, a weary man with a salt and pepper mustache, stepped out, his uniform crisp despite the hour. Amos greeted him, leading him toward the administrative wing. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her knitting bag a silent accomplice. At the office, she handed Dubois the key, her voice steady. "You'll find the sapphire star in the safe, Inspector, along with documents proving an illegal sale. Mr. Duval, Miss Warrington, and Mr. Blake are involved. I suggest you act quickly." Dubois raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Marple. We'll take it from here." She nodded, stepping back as Dubois and his men entered the office. The safe was opened, the necklace and papers seized. Duval's face, when he was summoned, was a mask of fury and defeat. Celeste stood silent, her eyes red, while Roger was nowhere to be found, likely hiding. But not for long. Miss Marple returned to her suite, the night's events settling like dust. On her balcony, she sat with her knitting, the sea's rhythm soothing her. The sapphire star was in custody, the vendetta exposed. Celeste's confession had been the key, her regret a chink in their armor. Miss Marple felt no triumph, only the quiet contentment of a puzzle solved. Tomorrow, at the banquet, she would lay out the truth for all to see, ensuring justice was served. For now, she let the island's beauty wash over her, the stars above a testament to the clarity she'd brought to its shadows.